My name is Ma, and until I turned 33, the most exciting event in my life was when the accounting firm I worked for switched from PCs to Macs. Not exactly thrilling, right? But then everything changed at a friend's birthday party. That night, I stood in the corner of a cramped living room, holding a soda and feeling uncomfortable in my too tight dress. The music was loud, way too loud for talking, but perfect for him, Charles. He was taller than most people, which is probably why he noticed me. He walked over with a confidence that made my heart skip a beat. "Hey, you're Ma, right?" His voice was clear even over the loud bass. Yeah. And you are?" I sipped my drink, trying to look calm. "Charles, I've seen you around. Mind if I join you?" He didn't wait for an answer, just stood next to me. "Not at all," I said, my voice nearly drowned out by the latest pop song blaring through the speakers. "So, Ma, what brings you here tonight?" he asked, leaning in. His tone was casual, but his eyes were intense. "Just here to celebrate Jessica's birthday. You know her long?" "Yeah, went to college with her. She keeps inviting me to these things. Can't say no, can I?" We laughed, and it felt natural, easy. "I get it. I work with her. She's kind of hard to say no to." "An accountant, right?" She mentioned it. He nodded like he already knew. "That's right. Numbers are my game," I joked, even though I usually found nothing funny about spreadsheets. "Sounds thrilling." He grinned, and I couldn't tell if he was teasing me or not. "Oh, absolutely. It's all wild parties and high stakes in the accounting world." We laughed again, and I felt at ease talking to someone genuinely interested in what I had to say. It was new, exciting, and a bit scary. "You want to grab some air?" he suggested, nodding toward the backyard. I nodded, grateful to escape the noise. Outside, the cool air was a relief. "So, what's a guy like you doing in a place like this?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Just looking for a good time, I guess. And maybe someone cool to hang out with," he said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. We talked about everything and nothing, movies, books we liked, how he was into graphic design but stuck in a corporate job he didn't love. It felt like we'd known each other for years. As the night wound down, he pulled out his phone. "Can I get your number? I'd really like to see you again, Ma." I hesitated, not used to this kind of attention, but something about him felt right. "Sure," I said, typing my number into his phone. He smiled, his whole face lighting up. "Great, I'll call you. We should go out, just the two of us." "Sounds good." I managed my stomach doing flips. I watched him go, a part of me still in disbelief that this was my life now. Maybe turning 33 wasn't so bad after all. Maybe it was just the start of something truly great. The days after Charles' call felt like a blur. Before I knew it, I was getting ready for our first date, my nerves all over the place since I didn't have much experience in this area. I chose a simple blue dress, nothing fancy, but I hoped it would do the trick. Charles picked me up at 7 sharp in his clean, well-kept sedan. Nothing flashy, but it suited him perfectly. As I got in, he flashed me a smile that could knock you sideways. "You look great, Ma," he said. "Thanks," I mumbled, probably blushing like a tomato. "You look nice too." Dinner was at a cozy little French place he knew. The food smelled amazing, but my stomach was doing somersaults. We ordered pasta, him with some fancy sauce and me with plain old marinara. "So, Ma, tell me something about you that no one else knows," he said, twirling his spaghetti expertly onto his fork. I chuckled, playing with my food more than eating it. "Well, I'm pretty boring, but I guess not everyone knows I can solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute." He raised his eyebrows. "Really now? That's pretty cool. You'll have to show me sometime." "Sure," I said, starting to relax a little. "What about you? Any hidden talents?" "I make a mean breakfast burrito," he boasted with a grin. "Best you'll ever have." "I'll take your word for it. Maybe you can prove it sometime," I teased. The conversation flowed, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. We saw each other constantly. Charles would come over after work, and I'd meet him for lunch near his office. He showed me his favorite spots around town, little nooks I'd never noticed before. It was like seeing the city for the first time. Things took a serious turn when he invited me to meet his parents, Brian and Camille. They lived in a small, cozy house full of photos and little decorations. Camille hugged me the second we walked in. "Oh, we've heard so much about you, dear," she said, squeezing my shoulders. She's lovely, Charles said, and I could tell he was pleased. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was non-stop. So, Ma, Charles tells us you're an accountant. That must be interesting, Brian said, passing me the potatoes. It has its moments, I replied with a smile. Mostly just numbers, but I like the order of it. And how's your family? Camille asked, genuinely interested. They're good, thanks. My dad's a businessman, always busy, but he's been really supportive of me. It was all happening fast, but it felt right. It was as if everything in my life had been leading up to this moment, meeting Charles and feeling like someone finally saw me for who I was, not just some plain Jane accountant. One evening, a few months into our whirlwind romance, we were walking along the riverbank. The city lights reflected off the water in a postcard-perfect way. Maud, I've been thinking, he started, stopping and facing me. Yeah? I asked, my heart starting to race. I don't want to wait any longer. I know this is fast, but will you marry me? Just like that, my world changed. No hesitation, no doubt, just a simple, yes, Charles, I'll marry you. The whirlwind didn't stop there. Soon after, I introduced Charles to my father. He took to Charles immediately, appreciating his straightforward manner and obvious affection for me. He's a good man, Ma, Dad said, giving his approval, which meant the world to me. So we got married. It was a modest wedding, nothing too extravagant, but it was perfect for us. I even found myself loving the way I looked in my wedding dress, something I'd never imagined. Smiling wide, I posted photos on social media, sharing my joy with friends and family. After the wedding, life didn't slow down. It picked up pace. Charles and I barely had time to savor our newlywed bliss before he suggested something big. Hey Ma, I've been thinking, he said one evening as we unpacked another box of wedding gifts in our cramped apartment. How about we move in with my folks? I paused, holding a coffee mug in my hand. Live with your parents? He nodded, looking serious. Yeah, they're not getting any younger, and I'd feel better if we were around to help out. Plus, it would save us some money on rent. It made sense, but moving in with the in-laws, that was sitcom territory. Are you sure they'd want us there all the time? Absolutely, he assured me. Mom's been hinting about it ever since we got engaged. Come on, it'll be good. 3 weeks later, there we were, pulling up to his parents' house with our lives packed into a bunch of boxes. Charles's mom, Camille, was waving from the porch before we even got out of the car. Oh, Ma, we're so thrilled to have you both here, she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that was a bit too tight. Brian, Charles's dad, clapped him on the back. Welcome home, son, and you too, Ma. The house was cozy, stuffed with furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, the Museum of 1973. I tried to keep a smile on my face, but I was already missing our little apartment. Charles sensed my hesitation. It's going to be great, you'll see, he whispered as we carried boxes inside. The first few days were an adjustment. Camille was constantly hovering, always popping into our room to ask if we needed anything. Just making sure you're comfortable, she chirped while I tried not to cringe at the invasion of privacy. One evening, we all sat down for dinner, Charles, me, Brian, and Camille. The conversation was painfully mundane until Charles dropped another bomb. So the house needs some major repairs, he announced casually between bites of meatloaf. I choked on my mashed potatoes. Repairs? Yeah, the roof's a mess and the plumbing's from the dark ages, he said. Brian nodded sullenly. We were thinking, Charles continued, avoiding my gaze, that maybe we could all chip in for the costs. I glanced at Camille, who was suddenly very interested in her plate. All of us. Well, I just got this pay cut at work, Charles muttered, so I'm a bit strapped at the moment. There it was. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I'll see what I can do, I managed to say, even though I wanted to say much more. Camille perked up, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, Ma, that would be so helpful. You're such an angel. The next few weeks were a blur of contractors and repairs. I wrote checks and smiled through gritted teeth as Camille gushed about how wonderful the house was looking. Brian slapped me on the back. You're really part of the family now, Ma. Part of the family, sure, the part that pays for everything. One particularly grueling day, after yet another round of expensive renovations, I felt the strain more than ever. I felt completely drained as I collapsed on our bed, exhausted. Charles came in and sat beside me. Thanks for handling all this, Ma, he said, sounding almost sincere. It's fine, I lied, staring at the ceiling. I just didn't realize how much it would be. He squeezed my hand. It'll all be worth it. This is for our future, right? Our future, I echoed, not sure whose future we were building anymore. As I lay there, listening to Charles' steady breathing, I couldn't help but wonder if moving in was the right decision. But there was no going back now. I was in this deep and had to see it through, whatever the cost. After the renovations, the house looked great, like something out of a magazine. Despite the financial strain, I felt a bit of pride looking around. We decided to throw a small dinner party to celebrate, just the four of us. That's when everything took an unexpected turn. We were in the middle of dinner, laughing and sharing stories, when Camille suddenly got quiet. The room felt heavy. She looked at Brian, then at us, her eyes teary. "We need to tell you both something important," she said, her voice shaky. Charles and I exchanged looks. "What's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening. Brian took a deep breath. "The house? It's mortgaged. Heavily mortgaged. We owe $300,000, and the bank could take it away if we don't settle the debt in 3 months." My fork clattered to my plate. "What? You mean all the repairs we just paid for?" Camille started sobbing. We were ashamed and thought we could manage it. But after the repairs and everything, there's just no way. I felt like I was in a bad dream. All the money, all the effort, and it was for a house that wasn't even secure. "So what are you saying now?" My voice was sharper than I intended. "Well," Charles started, his eyes avoiding mine. "I was hoping maybe, Ma, you could talk to your father." "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Ask my dad for $300,000? It's just, after his help, the house would be secure for us. For our future," Charles pleaded. Camille's sobbing grew louder, making me feel like the villain in this crazy drama. "Please, Ma, it's our home. We've spent decades in this house." I was furious, but the tears and the pleading wore me down. "I'll think about it," I finally muttered, feeling trapped. The next day, I called my dad, hesitantly explaining the situation. To my surprise, he agreed to help, but on one condition. "I'll give the money, Ma, but only with a formal agreement, a receipt. I want everything documented." When I told Charles about my dad's condition, he wasn't happy. "Why does it have to be so formal? Can't he just trust us?" "It's $300,000, Charles. It's a lot of money, and he's just being cautious," I argued, feeling the distance between us grow. "He'll get his paperwork," Charles muttered, clearly annoyed. The paperwork was drawn up and the money was transferred. Camille and Brian were relieved, constantly thanking me, but the air between Charles and me had changed. There was a coldness that hadn't been there before. Just when I thought my life couldn't get any darker, tragedy struck. "Ma, it's Kayla." A voice came through the line, shaky and choked. "Your dad, he had a heart attack. It's bad." My heart dropped to my stomach. "What? How is he?" "He didn't make it, honey. I'm so sorry." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "No, that can't be right," I mumbled, numb. I hung up and turned to find Charles standing in the doorway. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "My dad? He's gone," I managed to say before everything inside me broke and I started sobbing. Charles came over and put his arm around me, but it felt like being hugged by a stranger. "I'm sorry, Ma," he said, and it sounded sincere, but I was too lost in my grief to really hear him. Exhausted from another long day of funeral planning and dealing with the agency, I came home earlier than usual. I expected the house to be quiet, but as I inserted my key to the front door, I heard voices from the living room. It was Charles, his tone dripping with frustration and disgust, talking to his parents. "I can't do this anymore. Living with her is driving me nuts. It's too much," Charles complained. His mom, usually so sweet and understanding, replied in a stern whisper, "You have to hold on a bit longer, Charles. We need to figure out what to do with those receipts your father-in-law had. Ma has them now. The sooner I get out, the better. I'll grab those receipts and destroy them, and then I'll start all over again with that rich beauty I told you about." Charles's voice was cold and calculated. I felt a chill run down my spine. Here I was mourning my father, while the people I thought I could trust were plotting behind my back. They weren't the loving family I thought I married into. Instead, they saw me as a way to fix their financial troubles. Rage mixed with shock, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I slammed the door loudly, as if I had just come in, disrupting their scheming. "Oh, Ma, you're back early. How did everything go with the funeral plans?" Camille's voice shifted instantly to one of concern, her eyes wide with fake innocence. I forced a smile, my stomach turning. It's all coming together, thanks for asking. As I spoke, I could see the quick glances they shot each other, their faces a mask of fake concern. It made my skin crawl knowing their true colors, but I realized that showing my cards now wouldn't help. I needed to be smart. I needed to protect what was mine and possibly even get some justice for their deceit. The funeral was somber, the air heavy with grief and murmured condolences. But as the ceremony wrapped up and we returned to Charles's parents' house, the true colors became even clearer. As we gathered in the living room sipping on lukewarm coffee, the family I'm married into began to show their true colors. Charles's demeanor shifted, his usual charming facade crumbling away to reveal something more sinister. With a cold laugh, he looked straight at me and dropped the bomb. "Ma, pack your things. You need to get out. I've got someone else now, someone better." His words should have felt like a slap, and I pretended to be stunned. Before I could respond, Camille chimed in with a snide giggle. "We've really had enough of you, dear. We only put up with you for your money." "What about the house?" I asked, feigning disbelief. "The house that I paid to fix. The $300,000 I poured into it." Camille laughed harder as if I had told the best joke of the year. "Oh, sweetie, this house is ours. You're nothing here." Charles's smirk widened. "And those receipts you're so proud of? Found them in your dad's house and burned them. They're gone." For a moment, I let them believe they had won, but then I couldn't help it. I burst into laughter, my reaction confusing them, their smiles faltering. "Why are you laughing? What's so funny?" Charles demanded. I wiped a tear from my eye, still chuckling. "You three are just pathetic. You think you're so clever. The receipts you destroyed were copies. The real ones are safe with my lawyer." The color drained from their faces. Charles's arrogance turned to panic. "You can't prove anything," he stammered. "I can, and I will," I shot back, my voice steady and firm. "Now, I want my money back. All of it, or my next call is to the police." Charles and Brian looked at each other, their earlier confidence replaced by fear. Brian, usually so bold and brash, began to plead. "Ma, please, let's talk about this. We can sort something out." With the truth out and leverage in my hands, negotiations with Charles and his parents dragged on longer than I expected. It was clear they were trying every angle to sway the terms in their favor, but I wasn't about to budge. "Look, it's simple," I stated firmly during one of our many discussions at their now legally mine kitchen table. "The house gets transferred to my name in exchange for the money. That's the deal. No more games." Finally, they relented. We all agreed that the best course of action was to make everything official and legal. I insisted that everything be documented by a lawyer and confirmed with the proper papers. "I want no corners cut," I emphasized. At the lawyer's office, the atmosphere was tense as documents were signed and notarized. I watched closely as each signature was applied, ensuring there was no room for further deceit. Once everything was finalized, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I collected the documents related to the transfer and turned to Charles's mother, who looked deflated yet still carried a hint of her former haughtiness. "I'll be keeping these in a safe place," I said, holding up the papers before slipping them into a folder, just to ensure no one is tempted to pull any stunts. With the legalities handled, the divorce proceedings were straightforward. Charles was quiet, his earlier arrogance nowhere to be seen. When the final papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. A chapter closed. On the day they moved out, I stood on the porch of my now fully owned house and watched Charles, his mom, and dad carry their belongings to a rental van. Their movements were slow, the mood somber. I couldn't help but feel a mix of satisfaction and sorrow. This wasn't how I imagined my marriage ending, but under the circumstances, it was the best possible outcome. After everything settled down and I began to enjoy my newfound peace, word got back to me through friends about Charles and his situation. Apparently, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. His mistress had dumped him not long after our divorce, and his parents were now crammed into a tiny apartment, a big downgrade from the comfortable house they once had. It seemed karma had caught up with them quicker than I expected. Despite their situation, they started reaching out to me, bombarding me with calls and messages, probably hoping to weasel their way back into my life or, at least, my house. But I was done with their deceit. I blocked their numbers without a second thought and blacklisted them on all social media. It was liberating to cut the final threads that connected us. One afternoon, As I was enjoying the quiet moment with a book in my living room, there was a knock at my door. Peering through the peephole, I saw Charles standing there, a pathetic figure holding a bouquet of flowers. The audacity of it made me scoff. Opening the door, I couldn't help but laugh outright at the sight of him. Really, Charles? Flowers? He shuffled uncomfortably, the bouquet seeming to wilt along with his spirits. Ma, I've realized so many things. I was wrong, terribly wrong. Remember when you told me I disgusted you? I interrupted, leaning against the door frame, not hiding my amusement at his discomfort. What changed, Charles? Run out of options? He looked down, the shame clear on his face. I made mistakes, but I'm here to make things right. I shook my head, almost feeling sorry for him. Almost. You're not here to make things right, Charles. You're just desperate to get back to your comfortable life. But guess what? That life doesn't exist anymore. Not for you. His face fell, and he took a step back as if my words were physical blows. Ma, please. Save it. I cut him off sharply. I want you to leave. Don't come back here. We're done. Forever. Charles stood there for a second longer, his hope visibly crumbling. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his shoulders hunched in defeat. I returned to my book, feeling a sense of finality and relief. I smiled to myself, feeling the quiet of the house wrap around me like a comforting blanket. It was such a stark contrast to the chaos that once filled this space. The constant noise, the tension, the deceit, all of it was gone now. I could finally breathe deeply without the weight of worry on my chest. I was finally at peace, living life on my terms. I glanced around the room, taking in the calm atmosphere. The sun streamed in through the windows, casting a warm glow over everything. I realized how much I loved this house now that it was truly mine. The walls, once witnesses to arguments and schemes, now seemed to echo with serenity and contentment. I thought back to the days of turmoil and manipulation, remembering how trapped I felt. Charles and his family had taken so much from me, both emotionally and financially. But now they were out of my life for good. No bouquet of flowers or sweet talk could change that. Their attempts to manipulate me were over. As I sipped my tea and returned to my book, I felt a sense of triumph. I had faced betrayal and heartbreak, but I had come out stronger on the other side. I had taken control of my life and my future. The peace I felt now was well-earned and deeply cherished. I was truly, finally free. Free from lies, free from deceit, and free to live my life as I chose. The future stretched out before me, full of possibilities and opportunities. I smiled again, knowing that whatever came next, I was ready for it.
I initiated the divorce proceedings, deeming a financially struggling spouse to be of little value. My world was shaken when, during a business trip, my husband abruptly declared not only his intent to divorce, but also his simultaneous marriage to his lover. To add insult to injury, he accused me of marrying him solely for his wealth and demanded I forfeit any claims to our property. Confronting my indifferent husband, who had always treated me with disdain since our marriage, led to his unraveling and a downward spiral to rock bottom. I am Karen, 35 years old, raised by a single mother since my father's passing in kindergarten. Despite the financial challenges, we found happiness as a family of 3. Even as an adult with a decent salary, my frugal habits persisted from childhood. I married John, a wealthy man I met through an acquaintance, drawn to his kindness and the new world he presented. Our differing views on money and gender roles emerged after marriage. While John envisioned a traditional household, I was dedicated to my career and financial independence. Before marriage, John suggested I become a homemaker, assuming I would embrace traditional domestic roles. However, I expressed my desire to continue working until we had children, emphasizing the financial benefits. Although I managed to convince him, the reality of balancing work and household chores proved challenging. Despite being a full-time employee, my days were consumed with domestic responsibilities, leaving little time for us as a couple. In contrast, John, adopting a traditional husband role, contributed nothing to household tasks. While he witnessed my busy schedule, he simply indulged in dinner and relaxation upon returning home. Balancing work and domestic responsibilities took a toll on our relationship, prompting me to question if this was the essence of a marriage. Despite my efforts, I hesitated to voice my dissatisfaction. Fearing he might insist I quit my job despite his lack of contribution at home. I had hoped that the arrival of children would bring about a positive change in our relationship. Unfortunately, our connection had grown distant, casting doubt on the possibility of expanding our family. Feeling the urgency to discuss this matter, I approached John. "Hey, we should start considering having kids, right?" "Huh? Kids? You're quite energetic, considering you're tired from work and chores." "It's not about that. I want to have children. We haven't been married that long, but I'm already over 30. Women have a limited time to have children, and it's getting harder for me to conceive as I get older. It's almost too late. But we don't need kids. If we have one, you'll expect me to help, right? You know I'm busy with work, and I won't help with child rearing." Declaring you won't help with child rearing even before they're born is strange, isn't it? I plan to raise them alone, but shouldn't you at least have the intention to help? It's your child too. Child rearing is your job. I'm working to support the family, so I definitely won't help with the kids. You'll just complain that I don't help, making me the bad guy. You must have been indoctrinated with poverty and lots of kids since birth. We're not poor. We don't need kids. End of discussion. John abruptly ended the conversation, retreating to his room. Alone in the living room, tears overwhelmed me. My desire for children was not only rejected, but my upbringing was also mocked. Following this incident, our relationship deteriorated rapidly. Communication became scarce, and the possibility of having children seemed more distant. As I continued to juggle work and home responsibilities, taking on significant projects at work, I found myself increasingly distant from John. One day, when informing him about an upcoming business trip, his unexpected kindness surprised me. He wished me well and hinted at a big surprise upon my return. Despite having given up on him, his smile shook my resolve. However, my faint hope was shattered upon returning home. The front door wouldn't open, and John revealed the first surprise. He had changed the locks. The second surprise was the announcement of our divorce. He claimed to have forged my signature and submitted the papers with a friend as a witness. Inside, he presented a document for me to sign, waiving my rights to property division. Protesting the false accusations, I insisted on a mutual renunciation of property rights, intending to make it a public document. John, stubbornly retorting, redid the document on his computer, initiating a tense exchange. As I left the house, he continued to scorn me for being poor, even contemplating discarding my belongings. A few days later, John, in a state of panic, called me, wondering what I had done. "What do you mean I haven't done anything? Why are you panicking? I have a lot of questions. First, I was told to leave the apartment." "Oh, you were still living there. That's not allowed. It's a new month. You're trespassing." "Trespassing? But it's my house. Are you okay? Did you forget that it was a company apartment I rented? I was the leaseholder, so naturally, you can't live there anymore." "That's ridiculous. How could you do this? I can't believe you didn't know. I'm not the one who should be accused of doing things on my own. Didn't I tell you that you can't just change the locks of a rental apartment? It's my house. I can change the locks if I want. Didn't you listen? It was my leased apartment. Even if you were the leaseholder, the owner is the apartment manager. You can't change the locks without informing them." "Is that so? Also, I terminated the lease while you changed the locks. I was allowed to live there until this month. I was planning to return, but now you've unlawfully altered someone else's property, which could be criminal damage. Wait, why did you terminate it so early? Criminal damage? Is that why the police are at the front door now? I'm too scared to open it." But I calmly replied, "So the police did come. Don't worry, it's probably not for trespassing or criminal damage. It's better to talk to them." "Why do I know about the police?" "Because I reported you for filing the divorce papers yourself. It seems like you've committed crimes like forgery and fraudulent use of a private document. Divorce papers can be filed by one person, but only with mutual agreement and personal signatures. Since John forged my signature and the witness, it's obvious that it's a crime." But he seemed unaware of his guilt. I continued pressing further. So the divorce papers you submitted are invalid, and your marriage with Susan can't happen either. How do you know about Susan? Did you think I knew nothing? I had a private detective agency thoroughly investigate your affair with Susan. It was a busy time at work, and coordinating with the agency was tough. Plus, you even held a grand wedding ceremony while I was supposedly on a business trip. Are you okay? Your business trip was a lie. Yes, I took leave from work despite being busy to do some research and prepare documents. I knew about you bringing Susan home. It would have been impossible to gather this evidence while working. After I revealed everything, John was speechless and seemed quite downcast even over the phone. Then he pleaded with me, "Please don't tell Susan I'm divorced." Why would I? There's no such fact to tell. Really? Thank you. Are you misunderstanding something? When did you become divorced? That fake divorce paper is invalid, remember? So legally, you're still my husband, not divorced. What? So since you committed adultery, well, legally, my husband, Susan needs to pay compensation. I sent the demand for reparation to her house yesterday by express delivery. She didn't know you were married, right? Then I can't withdraw the claim at this point. I already knew Susan believed John was single, but I deliberately sent the reparation demand. Susan hasn't contacted me yet, so maybe she hasn't received the letter. It should arrive soon. Should you be on the phone with me when you also have to deal with the police? You're busy? I'll ignore the police. I won't be arrested. I'm going to Susan's house now to get the letter back before she or her family can accept it. He then hung up. He probably went straight to Susan's house to wait for the postman at the front door. I knew it would be futile because the letter was sent as registered mail to Susan only. Even if he waited for the postman, he couldn't receive it. A few hours later, a dispirited John called me. According to him, there was an incident when the postman arrived. Finally, I'll take that envelope. Who are you? You don't live here, right? I'm practically a resident here since I'm married. I have the right to receive the mail. I see, but I can't give you this envelope. It's registered mail for Susan only. What? Give it to me. Absolutely not. If you're so eager, ask Susan for permission. What's going on here? Oh, John, what's all this noise? What's happening? Ah, Susan, this is registered mail for you. This man insisted on taking it. Sorry for the disturbance. Now I'll be on my way. What's this? A demand for reparation. John, you are married. What's going on here? Sorry, it's just, she's an ex-wife from a long time ago. I was embarrassed to say I'm divorced. I'm sorry for keeping it secret. But it's strange, isn't it? We haven't been dating long, and a demand for reparation? If you were divorced before we started dating, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, my ex-wife is crazy. Maybe she's demanding reparation out of spite because I got married. That was the excuse he gave, but such a lie was quickly exposed. The envelope included a letter I wrote along with my contact information, so Susan called me directly. In that call, I told her about the affair, the invalid divorce, and that they had a wedding ceremony while he was still married to me. Although they had a wedding ceremony, they hadn't submitted the marriage registration yet. John wanted to submit it on April Fool's Day, so it was still pending. He probably delayed submitting the marriage registration due to uncertainty about whether the divorce was finalized. After being exposed, John fled from Susan's house and shamelessly contacted me again. I still had something to tell him, so we agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. As soon as I arrived, John said, "Karen, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's pretend we've been separated for a long time and officially divorced now. I can apologize to Susan for being secretly divorced and maybe cover it up. You think I'm desperate to stay married to you. I was going to file for divorce anyway, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation. Just trying to extort money from me, huh? Typical of the poor. You have such a poor heart. You're talking nonsense. Depending on my answer, everything can change. There's still an option where we don't divorce. If I say no, you can't reject it, meaning you can't marry Susan, and your marital status will be exposed. Fine, I'll pay the reparation. Just divorce me now. Sign here. Then, about property division. Property division? How much more do you want to take from me? Reparation should be enough. Remember, we agreed to waive property division, right? So let's make it official. All right. You're not as bad as I thought. Thank you. We then went to a public notary, made a public document for reparation and property division, and then to the city hall to submit the divorce papers, finalizing our divorce. Relieved, I exchanged final words with John. Glad we don't have to divide property. What are you saying? I'm the one who benefits from that. By the way, do you even have assets after paying me reparation? Susan will also claim damages. She mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. That's impossible. I'm marrying Susan. She can't claim that. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. Still living in a fantasy. You committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still married. You think Susan still believes you. Marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Susan will believe me. Believe that if you want. I heard from Susan directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them. You knew about that. I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken property division and been better off. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided property, you would have benefited more. What are you talking about, poor woman? Your family is poor, and you only make $15,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it would be barely $20,000. You don't have any property. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary is indeed $15,000. But you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no interest in me. But I became a director of the American branch. It's not $115,000 per year, but per month. $155,000 per month. So that's an annual income of $1.8 million. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $180,000 a year. $180,000? That can't be true. Of course, I haven't had the chance to spend such an amount, so I've been saving it for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. So I could have received half of that in the property division. You are my destiny after all. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay? After all the contempt, you think I'd gladly undo the divorce if you have that much money. You don't need to claim reparation, right? It's just a small amount for you. He who laughs at 1 cent will weep for 1 cent. This reparation is for the mental anguish you caused me. I'd like to claim more honestly. And since we've made it official, make sure to pay it even in installments. I'll be penniless. Also, don't go back to that apartment. Your belongings should have been moved to your parents' house by now. You thought I had few belongings, but that was because I had already moved. Most of them were. Were you that indifferent to me? I can't have so little, so I have to go back to my parents' house. They don't know anything yet, do they? Let me explain. Don't say anything. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said, don't ever step over our threshold again, so I have nowhere to go. He collapsed, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused trouble at the police station. Despite my advice, he went back to the apartment. He sat there aimlessly in the empty apartment until the manager called the police, and he was taken away. I'm not sure if it was for obstructing public duties, trespassing, or for the falsified divorce papers. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him. After talking with me and learning about Susan, they decided that apologizing and paying damages to Susan's family came first. They went to Susan's house to apologize, kneeling in front of her family. They settled everything without pressing charges for marriage fraud, even paying for the wedding expenses. I had expected them to sue, so it was disappointing they didn't. So, I decided to pursue legal action against him for forging the divorce papers. John offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't want him to think everything could be solved with money. I wanted him to be convicted and understand the gravity of his actions, even if it cost time and money. I left everything to my lawyer, so it wasn't too burdensome for me. Even though it took time, John, exposed for his actions and the marriage fraud at his company, couldn't stay there anymore. After being detained by the police and subsequently absent without leave, he was eventually fired. He ended up living at his parents' home, working all day at a relative's construction company. His father took all his earnings, leaving him with no income. I thought his parents wouldn't abandon him, but they were stricter than I expected. They paid my reparation and Susan's compensation, planning to make him work like a horse until he repaid everything. He lived in a shed-like place with no electricity, receiving only $5 per day for food, deducted from his salary. They plan to disown and kick him out once he's repaid everything. A harsh fate after years of hard work. I was offered a position at the head office abroad, so I moved overseas after the divorce was finalized. I worried John might come to me for help or harbor resentment, but moving abroad alleviated those concerns. I thought work would be my partner for a while, but soon I found a new relationship. I'm now dating a foreign executive at our head office, and I'm pregnant with plans to marry soon. I told him everything about my past and my ex-husband, and he's understanding. I'll take maternity leave and plan to return to work later, supported by him. He's enthusiastic about taking paternity leave and co-parenting, showing a different cultural perspective. After being tormented by my ex-husband, I finally feel I'm grasping true happiness and confidence in building the happy family I'd always dreamed of. Many suffer due to selfish spouses, and while divorce isn't always the right choice, enduring silence isn't a virtue. It's important to know that honest discussions can lead to resolutions, and sometimes divorce is a necessary option. I'm Maria Dalton, about to turn 27 this year, and I've been happily married for 5 years. My son, Martin, just celebrated his 4th birthday. Initially, I worked full-time after tying the knot, but now I balance part-time work at the same company. My husband, Kevin, is 30 years old, 3 years my senior. Our journey from dating to marriage was initiated by Kevin's passionate advances. But post-marriage, I observed a shift in his demeanor towards a more domineering side. Kevin has a 20-year-old sister named Jane Dalton, and their age gap seems to contribute to a somewhat indulgent relationship on Kevin's part. Before marriage, I didn't mind Jane's frequent visits and assumed they got along well. However, after tying the knot, I started noticing changes in her behavior. Jane often drops by unannounced, at any time, and expects to be served without ever bringing a token of appreciation. Kevin, rather than addressing the situation, expects me to accommodate her demands. Jane acts as though I'm invisible, addressing only Kevin with a casual "brother, I'm here again." Despite not preparing for an additional guest, I end up serving dinner to Jane. Kevin, instead of understanding, blames me aloud, insisting I should have been more considerate. Despite Jane's verbal apologies, it's evident she relishes Kevin's preferential treatment. Left with leftovers, I prepare my own meal while Kevin and Jane continue their chat on the sofa, leaving the dining table messy. They never acknowledge Martin or me, treating us more like hired help than family. One evening, as I'm about to take a bath with Martin, Kevin interrupts, loudly instructing me to buy a cake for Jane. Despite it being late, Jane insists on having it immediately. Kevin blames me for delaying, and, feeling compelled, I reluctantly head to the cake shop with Martin in tow. Overhearing their conversation, I learn they're criticizing me for being inconsiderate and questioning the decision to marry me. Meanwhile, Martin, though unable to grasp the words, senses tension in our relationship. Suppressing my emotions, I ask him about his cake preference, and he cheerfully requests one with lots of fruits. Our trip to the cake shop was filled with discussions about cakes, momentarily pushing aside Kevin's earlier words. Martin and I arrived just before closing time, fortunately finding the cake Jane desired. We purchased 2 cakes, including the fruit-loaded one Martin wanted. Back home, I served the cakes to Jane and Kevin, then prepared Martin's cake and headed to the dining room. The moment I placed it in front of Martin, Jane pointed and expressed her desire for that cake. Before I could react, Kevin moved Martin's chosen cake in front of Jane, disregarding Martin's protests. Kevin justified his action, claiming he bought the cake with his earnings and had the right to choose for Martin. Unable to contain my emotions any longer, I voiced my dissatisfaction. In response, Kevin threatened with divorce. Martin, who had stopped crying, anxiously held my hand and then, after some thought, said, "Mom, I'd also love cake with strawberries on it. Yes, it's really delicious." He mentioned this while eating a cake initially wanted by Jane. Feeling that Martin was enduring too much, I lifted his cake plate when I saw Jane reaching for it. I took Martin to the next room so he could enjoy his cake in peace. Kevin apologized to Jane, claiming he was sorry for being stingy. Despite wanting to retort, I held back for Martin's sake. Watching Martin innocently enjoy his cake was a heartwarming sight. After finishing the cake, we decided to have a late bath and sleep in Martin's bed. The next morning, I discovered Jane had already left. As I prepared breakfast, I heard Martin crying. Shockingly, his piggy bank, a gift from my father, was broken, and the saved money was gone. Martin, who always said goodnight to the piggy bank, was left heartbroken. When I questioned Kevin about it, he casually mentioned that Jane needed some money, so she took it from the piggy bank. Holding a crying and shaken Martin, I felt his pain so acutely that I cried with him. It was painful to witness Kevin prioritizing and caring for his sister more than our son. Expressing my anger and sadness, I confronted Kevin, breaking my usual silence on arguments in front of Martin. Kevin, without a word, went to the bedroom and returned with something shocking in hand: divorce papers. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Kevin had tucked away somewhere I didn't know. In a sudden burst, he confronted me, shoving the papers at me before storming out of the house with a loud bang. Martin, who had never cried over the issues with Kevin and Jane, seemed to have reached his limit, crying since last night. Unable to bear seeing Martin so hurt, I suggested skipping daycare for the day, and he happily agreed with a loud yes, showing a faint smile. We spent the day playing and bonding, with Martin bringing a picture book from the shelf, sitting on my lap, and happily remarking, "The teacher at the nursery today was Mama, right? He looks like an angel." His little heart seemed filled with patience, and I decided to make the day special by taking a day off from work. Despite causing potential trouble at my workplace, they kindly understood the situation and granted me a day off. In the morning, we visited the park, played hide and seek, and had fun in the sandbox and on the slide. When we returned home for lunch, Martin appeared sleepy, usually napping by himself. But today he fell asleep on my lap like when he was a baby. Though I initially thought of doing household chores during his nap, I decided that today was special. Instead, I allowed myself to be healed by his peaceful sleeping face and gentle breathing. However, my serene moment was abruptly interrupted by a noise from the entrance, indicating the front door had opened. As it wasn't Kevin's usual time to come home, I became suspicious and quickly hid in the bedroom closet, clutching Martin. A voice echoed through the house, and to my surprise, it was Jane. Trembling with fear, I listened as she searched for something, expressing frustration over not finding it. Jane then made a phone call, mentioning Kevin and discussing their unsuccessful search. After hearing her lock the front door and leave, I put Martin to bed and contemplated the strange events. I couldn't comprehend why Jane had entered the house and what they were looking for. Suddenly, Kevin seemed like a stranger, and I felt a mix of disgust and fear towards him. Swiftly packing essentials for Martin and myself, we headed to the station and took a train to my parents' house. Fortunately, their home was nearby, just 2 stations away. Although I hadn't contacted them beforehand, my parents sensed something from my expression and welcomed us without asking questions. I shared the entire ordeal with them, including my fear of staying at our house due to Kevin and Jane's actions. Upon hearing my mother's suggestion that Jane might have been looking for my belongings, possibly cash cards, I recalled my past experience as a successful CEO in the handmade goods industry. I had entrusted the company to friends when I decided to prioritize raising my child after getting married. Although I still worked part-time and communicated with the company from home, Kevin was unaware that I was still the CEO. I discovered the hidden divorce papers that Kevin had tucked away, suspecting that he thought I had a decent amount of savings. While I've mentioned to him that I still received some assistance from the company, I've deliberately kept the details about being the CEO and my savings private. This secrecy stems from realizing early in our marriage that Kevin struggles with managing money and tends to spend everything he earns. Kevin, at first, provided only $200 a month for food expenses and even suggested I quit my job to become a full-time housewife. However, with the financial strain of raising Martin and only $200 for food, I never agreed to be a full-time housewife. Eventually, he reluctantly allowed me to work part-time, and to ensure I wouldn't consider divorce, he had me sign a post-marital property waiver through a lawyer. Since Martin's birth, I used my savings for his nursery fees and clothes, as I've only received $200 for food. I've never asked Kevin for additional funds beyond the food budget, leading him to believe I have savings. Considering Jane's apparent need for money and Kevin's perception of my financial situation, they might be searching for my cash cards. I have a separate savings account dedicated to Martin, with a portion of my salary directly deposited into it each month. Despite their search, they won't find the cash cards, as I always carry my valuables. However, there's still an unsettling issue. Jane might be entering our house even when we're not there, and Kevin may be allowing it. Following my father's advice, I decided to store my valuables, including the cash cards, in my parents' safe. As I pondered their need for money, Martin approached my father, crying over his broken piggy bank and the shattered promise of saving up. My father, angered by Martin's story, vowed to call Kevin. My mother suggested finding out their purpose calmly, as Kevin's mention of divorce might shift blame to us, making the divorce more favorable for him. To ascertain their purpose, I decided to record their conversation, consulting a lawyer who was a friend of my father's. Returning home, I began cooking dinner, keeping my phone screen down to record secretly. Kevin arrived home, surprising me by immediately asking about my cash cards. When I questioned him, he gave vague answers, attempting to deceive me. When I remained silent, Kevin grew agitated and demanded all my part-time money for his sister. Refusing, I explained it was from Martin's savings. In response, he angrily pushed the signed divorce papers toward me, declaring that I was living off his money and didn't need to save for Martin. He even uttered words implying he valued Jane more than our son. Hearing this, I stopped preparing the meal, put the divorce papers in my bag, took Martin's hand, and headed for the door. Kevin, in a loud voice, declared his serious intent for divorce, instructing me never to come back. I responded by stating I wouldn't return to a house where a stranger could come and go freely. After leaving, I received numerous messages and calls from Kevin, which I ignored. Turning off my phone, I sought refuge at my parents' house, sharing the recording and divorce papers with them. Although I confessed to having no love or affection for Kevin, I expressed concern for Martin. My parents advised me to do as I pleased, acknowledging the potential emotional impact on Martin if a divorce were to occur. While grappling with the decision to divorce Kevin, Martin expressed his hunger. My mother, seeing my distress, kindly made him hamburgers, his favorite dish. Overwhelmed with emotions, tears welled up in my eyes as my mother told Martin with a warm smile that she prepared the hamburgers so that he and I could visit whenever we wanted. Taking a bite, Martin exclaimed with joy, praising Grandma's hamburgers and expressing a desire to eat them every day. I responded, saying it's because the hamburger contains the love I have for him, and he, in a touching gesture, took a big bite and offered it to me. Moved by Martin's kindness, my tears couldn't be held back, and even though I tried to stop them, they persisted. My father, noticing Martin's concern, reassured him that my tears were of happiness, not sadness. Hearing this, Martin, in a moment of understanding, hugged me, and my father's eyes turned bright red. Realizing the blessing of being with family, I remarked to Martin that family is precious. Surprised, he questioned if Dad had mentioned that only Jane was family. My father gently confirmed it, but then asked Martin if he wanted to live with them as family. With a laugh, Martin happily agreed, making everyone smile naturally. Despite contemplating divorce, the meal felt so happy that I finally decided to part ways with Kevin. I planned to inform Martin about it, and even though discussing it weighed heavily on my heart, Martin seemed to grasp the situation. Happily, he expressed the desire to live as a family, embracing the pet dog and calling him his younger brother despite the dog being older. Preparations for the divorce began, starting with contacting a lawyer who was a friend of my father. The next day, we formalized the contract, and my father and Martin shared comforting laughter while I laid in bed, reminiscing about my childhood. The following day, upon checking my smartphone, I found over 200 calls and messages from Kevin, showcasing his emotional instability. Exhausted, I turned off my phone, and with the lawyer's assistance, we explained the situation to my parents. Jane had accumulated significant debt from a casino and shopping addiction, and Kevin acted as her guarantor, planning to use my savings. The lawyer confirmed that the divorce papers had already been submitted, and Kevin sobbed upon realizing it was finalized. Despite expecting disagreements about child support, he signed a pledge to pay $340 to Martin every month. In a subsequent call from Kevin, his tone lacked aggression, and he calmly admitted to financial manipulation and explained his complex feelings toward Jane. I firmly asserted my decision not to reconsider and heard his faint sobbing before he wished me happiness and hung up. Remaining strong until the end, I discussed future plans with my parents and decided to stay with them until Martin grows up. I resumed my role as a company president and later learned that Kevin and Jane had informed their parents about the divorce and debt, resulting in dissownment. Today, I find happiness being with my family. Since your tummy is empty after giving birth, you should be able to do the housework, right? When I returned home after giving birth to triplets, I found out our home had turned into a hole. My husband believed that I had been neglecting house chores using pregnancy as an excuse. He said now that I had given birth, I had no reason to slack off. Seeing me struggle with chores in my frail state, he declared, "I'll call my mother. She'll teach you how you should be as a housewife." My mother-in-law is notoriously strict, and to be honest, I've always found her difficult to deal with. Soon after his phone call, she came around with a furious look on her face. But what happened was something I could have never imagined. I lost my parents when I was young, and I was raised by my grandmother, but she passed away before I graduated from high school. With the help of kind neighbors, I managed to graduate high school. I found a job right after graduation and left my hometown. I had no choice but to sell my grandmother's house, so I no longer have a home to go back to. Fortunately, the people I worked with were very nice to me, and I met someone who I wanted to be married to. When I visited his parents for the first time to announce our marriage, I felt scared by just looking at his mother's strict face. My husband didn't plan to live with his parents, so we started our married life just the two of us. He was a very dependable husband, and though I handled most of the housework, his words with appreciation made me happy. My husband would tell me how good my cooking was, and that alone was enough to make me happy in our marriage. Around our 6-month anniversary, we found out that I was pregnant with triplets. The odds of naturally conceiving triplets are about 1 in 700,000. Since it was my first pregnancy and I had no parents to rely on, I took maternity leave early. I had a strange feeling of happiness mixed with a little fear as my body was changing. A female colleague of my husband, who had been kind to me since we started dating, had gone on maternity leave a few months earlier. She had worked almost until she gave birth, which I found incredibly powerful compared to my situation. I told her that I felt pregnant for the first time and expressed my fears and worries to her. She reassured me, saying everyone's nervous the first time. Her words kept me going as my little babies grew inside me. But my husband didn't see it that way. He accused me of slacking off whenever he noticed the slightest lapse in household chores. I wasn't intentionally cutting corners. Despite my complaints of nausea, heartburn, and fatigue, which I had never experienced before, he dismissed them as my imagination. "I'm out working for the family, and you want me to do the housework you neglected. You do nothing but lie around all day, enjoying 3 meals and naps. How lazy you are." To him, housework wasn't a job. It was a woman's duty. Sure, I did most of the housework before I got pregnant, but he always helped me a little when I asked. When I pointed this out to him, he replied, "Housework is a woman's duty. Of course, you should do 99.9% of it, since I'm the one who earns the money. 0.1% of my help is more than enough." I then realized that there was no point in arguing anymore. I gave up and tried to meet his demands while sneaking in some rest. A few months had passed, perhaps because of this stress. I was hospitalized for a possible premature labor. The triplets were still too small, and an early birth would decrease their chances of survival. So, I was ordered to complete bed rest. I told my husband on the phone, and then he did come after his shift. "But staying in the hospital, you're not even due yet. You asked the doctor to stay in the hospital so you can avoid housework, didn't you?" He accused. Didn't he hear from the doctor? I was shocked. I had called him because the doctor wanted to explain the situation to both of us and asked him to come as soon as possible. "Who's going to cook for me while you're here? You managed to come here for doctor's appointments so far, right? You'll be fine. Let's go home." He started packing my stuff and tried to drag me out of the bed. "Do you know how much it will cost to stay here? I have no intention of paying medical bills for someone who's not even sick. A C-section childbirth should be natural. Don't do anything that deviates from the laws of nature. Shame on you." His mention of a C-section showed that he had at least heard the explanation, but he clearly had not understood any of it. It was too early to give birth. The babies had to grow inside me. Hospitalization wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. Besides having triplets, a C-section had been the plan from the beginning. I would have preferred a natural birth if it weren't for the triplets. But my husband, who hadn't helped me with anything at all, was full of disdain. "You just got me pregnant, and now you abandoned me." My anger against him was building up. If it were just about me, I can bear it, but 3 new precious lives were growing inside me. I'd do anything to protect them. But no matter how I tried to explain, my husband wouldn't listen. And from the anger, I started struggling to breathe. That's when a midwife rushed into the room. My husband was kicked out of the room, and I could hear him getting scolded. This was a matter of life and death, and his behavior was dangerously close to being reportable. Other pregnant women were so disturbed by him. They complained to him. After that, he behaved himself in the hospital. With one problem less, I thought I could focus on the babies. But I had to have a C-section soon, even though it was a little early for them. My biggest concern was whether they would be born healthy. But to my relief, the triplets were strong and healthy, happy babies. However, because they were born prematurely, they needed to stay in the hospital for a while. Even though my stay was longer compared to natural birth, I was discharged before my babies. When I got home, still feeling weak, I found out that the house had turned into a hole. "You're the one who got away from housework for such a long time, so it's not my fault. But since you're back home now, hurry up, clean the house, and cook something for me." It was obvious that while I was in the hospital, he hadn't done anything around the house at all. Instead of washing clothes, he seemed to have just bought new ones and piled them up. I could tell if he was ordering food or buying takeout every night by the dirty food boxes or containers of rotten leftovers all over the place. The awful smell was undoubtedly from all this mess. There was no way I could clean up all this mess in a day or two, and I stood there stunned. You slim down around the belly. Should be easier to move around, right? So don't just stand there and get to work. He never visited me when I was hospitalized and didn't even come to pick me up. I was foolish enough to have a little hope that he might welcome me back home. In reality, I should never have expected anything from him. I was still not in the best condition after the delivery, yet I started cleaning up little by little, taking breaks in between. But whenever I was resting, he would find me and say, "Don't slack off, get up, and start cooking. Don't you understand that I should be the priority?" No matter how I tried to explain my situation, he just saw it as an excuse to slack off. I also had to visit the triplets in the hospital and pump milk. I couldn't just clean all the time. He demanded home-cooked meals, but the kitchen was filthy with a pile of garbage. I didn't think it was a good idea to prepare food in such condition, so I resorted to buying pre-cooked meals. I managed to go shopping, but I wasn't recovered enough to cook from scratch. So picking different pre-cooked meals each day was all I could manage. The regret of not being able to carry the triplets to full term haunted me, keeping me awake at night. I think that too contributed to my slow recovery. I begged my husband to take it easy on me, warning him that at this rate, I might end up back in the hospital, but in a different way. But he sternly refused, saying, "I won't accept any more hospital stays just because you want to avoid housework." I continued to sneak in breaks while doing chores. Eventually, I reached my limit and fell asleep without noticing his return. Sleeping instead of greeting me when I returned from work. What a life you have. Do you realize who you owe your livelihood to? You need to be re-educated as a wife. I'll tell my mother about your laziness and have her set you straight. He said that and called his mother right in front of me. He told her, "I checked myself into the hospital just to avoid housework and to try to slack off using postpartum as an excuse." He would say his mother was strict with discipline. The memories of her scolding him as a child were still vivid in his mind. I had found her intimidating since the first time I met her. She had always seemed stern and hard to approach. I was terrified that it was my turn to receive strict discipline from my mother-in-law. She was supposed to come the next day, but on the day my husband rushed out of the house to avoid her, using some work-related meeting as an excuse. Right after he left the house, there she was arriving with a fierce look on her face. I braced myself for a scolding before I could even greet her. "What are you doing?" she said. I thought, here comes the criticism for my cleaning. "You should be resting after risking your life for giving birth." She took the vacuum cleaner from me, put on her apron, then started to clean. She questioned me if I've been able to have enough rest in a clean bed, and then decided which room to clean first. Once one of the rooms was clean, she told me to rest there. I wondered if it was okay, but my body was already screaming its limits. Intending to rest only briefly, I ended up resting deeply. I woke up and rushed out of the room to look for my meal and found that she had not only taken care of the piled-up laundry, but also prepared a warm meal. Though there were still rooms that needed to be cleaned, the house was transformed into a livable space. I couldn't be more grateful for what she had done all by herself. Then my husband came home. Seeing the living room and entrance cleaned, he was triumphantly convinced that his judgment was right. My mom really did a good job teaching my lazy wife a lesson. "I guess I've been too lenient with my wife. I'll learn from you and start being strict with her," he exclaimed. He saw the warm and appetizing meal. He started eating by himself. Suddenly, my mill snatched the meal from him and took the fork out of his hand. "Who said you could eat? Get down on the floor," she commanded with an undeniable force, making my husband jump out of his chair and kneel on the floor. She asked him what the hell he had done to his own wife. She said to him, "Childbirth is a life-threatening event, and you, instead of caring for your wife who went through it, made her do household chores. I did not raise such a worthless son. How on earth could you think she stayed in the hospital just to escape housework? You disregard the value of life too much. like a monster wearing human skin. Don't you know what a C-section is? It's surgery where the abdomen is cut open. How dare you leave the house so dirty and do nothing about it while your wife needed to rest in a clean environment? You are the one in need of discipline, not your wife, you useless bust. The scene was unbelievable, like a grown man being scolded like a child. You never change, do you? You take the opinions of others at face value, and when corrected, you become stubborn and refuse to listen. Your father now acts more responsibly, you foolish son, she continued. She questioned him why he mistreated his postpartum wife, and my husband confessed. He was influenced by a male colleague. He was told that women use pregnancy as a weapon to become bold and impudent. Pregnant women slack off on household chores using morning sickness as an excuse and opt for easy childbirth using the baby as a reason. They would conveniently control the men because the men don't know any better. She was infuriated to find out that her son believed such an absurd story, and he had been oppressing me. I was worried that her blood pressure would rise so high and cause a stroke. He was unable to retort, just shriveled up. My mill had offered to help with postpartum care, but my husband declined, saying he would take care of me, which she initially admired as his growth. However, the reality was the opposite, and she apologized to me for not visiting, having trusted her words. I felt touched knowing she had been so concerned about me. My mill was strict but very sensible. She said that anyone who spreads falsehoods is no good colleague at all. She told him off not to believe such people. He optimistically said, as for that colleague, he was away on a business trip for a while, so there was no need to worry about it anymore. I doubted whether he truly understood, and my mill seemed to share my skepticism. She was looking down at him doubtfully. After this incident, my husband became more cooperative, and my health improved. Eventually, I was able to manage grocery shopping after visiting the triplets at the hospital. My mill still regularly came over to help and left pre-cooked meals that could be stored for later. I felt so grateful for her kindness. When the triplets came home from the hospital, she visited almost every day, reminding my husband of the importance of family. Initially, he refused to change diapers, but fearing my mill's wrath, he reluctantly started helping. He would attentively care for the children in her presence, but once she left, he would cease doing anything. His attitude became apparent even without her watching, leading him to busily search the house for hidden cameras. It was obvious to her anyway by just watching him changing diapers. However, the once tiny triplets grew up fast. Eventually, my husband gave in and only helped with diapers and feeding. Until the triplets started one for nighttime crying, he claimed he had work the next day, used earplugs, and went to sleep. This left me feeling like being a single mom. Then one day, he casually remarked, "The triplets are 1 year old now. You can handle them alone, right? The hardest part is still to come." Had he been influenced again by that same colleague? Upon further conversation, he mentioned that his female colleague who had returned from maternity leave said childcare became easier once the child turned 1. It was the same colleague who had encouraged me during my anxious first pregnancy. Would you really say something so careless? So now that you've been slacking on housework for so long, time to go full throttle. Childcare and housework are women's jobs, not for men. By the way, when are you going back to work? I didn't plan to have 3 babies. I can't feed them by myself. With these words, I was certain the colleague who had been away on business had returned and filled my husband's head with more falsehoods. He would leave his clothes around and never clean up after meals. He seemed to have regressed to the days when he expected everything to be done for him. Bath, meals, tea, with 3 toddlers moving around. I couldn't manage all the housework. I claimed that if he wanted the housework done, he needed to participate in childcare. But as I expected, he labeled it as an excuse for slacking. Moreover, his lack of interest in the children, he often left dangerous items like razors within their reach. When I pointed it out, he would scoff, saying, "I used to handle it before pregnancy." He even insisted that the one who notices should put away. This led to arguments, and in his frustration, he started ignoring me and the children. He would step over them as they lay on the floor. He could have stepped on them if they made little movement. I told him to be more careful with them, but he ignored. Because I protected the children and told him off, he became even more stubborn and sulky. I gave up, and I consulted my mill. The next morning, she came over, woke up my still sleeping husband, and took him back to her place. A few days later, they returned, and my husband looked drained. I could tell he had undergone intense re-education. He kneeled before me, half crying, apologizing. He looked quite shocked and exhausted from being scolded and beaten back by his mother. The shock seemed to stem mainly from being lectured at work about his complaints. Angry at being scolded by his mother, he had vented at the office about what a terrible wife I was. The recently returned female colleague, hearing his complaints, asked, "Triplets?" When my husband nodded, she erupted in fury. I said child care gets a bit easier at 1 year old for one child, not triplets. How can you leave your wife alone with 3 babies? What kind of father are you? She told him off. Even the other men in the office were astonished. It's a miracle she hasn't divorced you yet. The issue escalated, and his boss also reprimanded him severely. Rumors had spread that he was abusive towards me and the children. At the same time, the male colleague who had misled him was being fired for inappropriate behavior towards female colleagues. He had claimed to be on a business trip, but it was just a cover for dealing with his divorce. Upon returning, he was faced with a complaint filed against him, leading to police involvement. My husband, realizing the gravity of the situation after his boss declared an investigation into these rumors, finally felt a sense of crisis. His mother also warned him that if he was abandoned by his wife, she too would forsake him. Her stern words questioning his urge to push me back to work and his failure to support the family alone when he claimed to be the head made him change. I was wrong. I'll change and devote myself to my wife and children. Please don't leave me, he begged. My mill told me to tell him anything freely, but I decided to forgive him just this once. However, I made it clear one more slip, and I wouldn't forgive him. Since then, he has changed, actively engaging in housework and childcare. He even bought cooking books for simple men's recipes, and cooking on the weekends became his routine. Occasionally, my mill would drop by and announce to play with the children, and it was a huge help. By the time the triplets were old enough to go to daycare, he had learned to care for them well enough that I felt comfortable working part-time. I had to give up my full-time job to take care of my triplets. However, I plan to increase my hours and hopefully return to full-time work once they start school. If it weren't for my mill's help, we would never be able to continue as a family. I am immensely grateful for her support and hope to repay her kindness in time. My name is Clara, a 32-year-old woman who, once a firm believer in fairy tale endings, saw her life take an unexpected turn 3 years ago when I met Mark, the man who would eventually become my husband. Our story unfolds as a journey of love, trust, and eventual betrayal against the backdrop of what seemed like a perfect marriage. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning when fate led me to the Corner Cafe, a John Grisham novel in hand, lost in the world of legal thrillers. That's when Mark entered, immediately noticeable with an air of confidence and a warmth in his smile that felt inviting. "Hey, is that Grisham's latest?" he asked, nodding towards my book, his friendly voice tinged with genuine curiosity. "Yeah, just started it. He's always a good read," I responded, pleasantly surprised by the ease of our conversation. We delved into discussions about our favorite authors, and our conversation flowed effortlessly. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I grew closer. Our shared interests in music, particularly old jazz, and a mutual love for exploring hidden bookstores around the city cemented our bond. Mark was charming, respectful, and attentive, and each encounter felt like catching up with an old friend. One evening, as we walked along the river, Mark's tone turned serious. "Clara, I've never felt this way before. I think I'm falling for you," he confessed under the dim glow of the streetlights. His words sent a rush of warmth through me, and I admitted, "I feel the same, Mark. You're unlike anyone I've ever met." 6 months flew by, and our relationship only grew stronger. During a cozy dinner at my apartment, Mark proposed, and there was no hesitation in my yes. I loved him, and I believed in our future together. The joy of our engagement, however, was soon met with apprehension as the time came to meet Mark's parents. His mother, Linda, was a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to judge my every move, while his father was more amiable but carried an undeniable seriousness, especially regarding the institution of marriage. During a formal dinner at their house, Mark's father brought up the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "It's just practical," he stated matter-of-factly. The request caught me off guard, but given my past experience with a cheating ex-boyfriend, I understood the necessity. "I agree, but I have a condition," I said, steadying my voice. "If either of us cheats, the cheater owes the other $100,000. Mark's expression was a mix of surprise and respect. "I promise, Clara, I'd never cheat on you," he said earnestly. Our wedding was a beautiful affair, filled with laughter, dancing, and promises of forever. The first year of our marriage felt like living in a dream. We traveled to romantic destinations, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and supported each other's ambitions. Mark was not just my husband. He was my best friend and confidant. After the whirlwind of our wedding, Mark and I settled into married life with an ease that surprised even me. Our first year was like living in a bubble of happiness, untouched by the outside world. Our honeymoon in Paris was a dream, strolling along the Seine as two lovebirds lost in a city of love. "Can you believe we're here?" I inquired of Mark one evening as we observed the Eiffel Tower lighting up. He drew me close and responded, "With you, I can believe anything. This is just the start for us, Clara." Those days were filled with laughter, romantic dinners, and promises of a shared future. Returning home with a suitcase full of memories, our bond felt unbreakable. In our daily routine, Mark would bid me farewell each morning before work, and I'd have dinner waiting for him upon his return. Our conversations stretched late into the night, discussing everything and nothing. One night, while cleaning up after dinner, Mark remarked, "You know, I never thought I'd be this happy doing mundane stuff like washing dishes." I playfully splashed water at him, and he laughed, catching it in his hands. "That's because you've got an amazing wife. It's all about good company," he said. "Absolutely the best decision of my life marrying you." Despite the growing pressure from external expectations, particularly the anticipation of starting a family, our happiness persisted. Linda, Mark's mother, would drop not-so-subtle hints at family gatherings, asking, "So when are we going to hear some good news?" I brushed it off with a joke, but her persistence strained me over time. Mark reassured me, saying, "Don't let my mom get to you. We'll start a family when we're ready, not minutes sooner." Our first year of marriage was magical, celebrated with a quiet dinner at home. Mark surprised me with a necklace I had admired months ago. "Happy anniversary, Clara. Here's to many more years of happiness," he said, his eyes shining with love. As we cuddled on the couch that night, I felt incredibly fortunate. However, as our second year of marriage began, the pressure from Mark's family, particularly Linda, took a toll. It wasn't just about starting a family. Her criticisms infiltrated every aspect of our lives. Linda's disapproval, often hidden in seemingly helpful comments, turned every visit into a nightmare. One afternoon, as I set the table for lunch, Linda walked into the kitchen, eyeing the spread with a disapproving frown. "Is this what you're serving? A bit simple, don't you think?" she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. Clenching my jaw, I tried to maintain composure. Her critiques extended beyond my cooking, finding fault in everything from house decorations to how I spent my free time. One evening, relaxing in the living room, Linda gave her unsolicited opinion, stating, "You know, Clara, if Mark gave me the money he spends on you." I contemplated hiring a proper cleaner and cook. Mark appeared uncomfortable, but he remained silent. His quiet response felt like a betrayal, and though seething with frustration, I managed to say, "Well, Linda, I'm doing my best here." The hurt intensified as Mark's attitude began to mirror his mother's criticisms, albeit in a more subtle manner. Following one of Linda's visits, Mark casually suggested, "Mom might have a point about the house. Maybe we should consider getting some help." A pang of hurt and frustration hit me, and I questioned, "So you think I can't handle it either?" He backpedaled, saying, "No, that's not what I meant." But the damage was done. Constant criticisms and Mark's growing detachment strained our marriage, leading to arguments over trivial matters and transforming our once easy conversations into tense exchanges. After a particularly heated argument, I found myself wondering aloud, "What happened to us, Mark? We used to be on the same team." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated, and replied, "I don't know, Clara. Everything feels so complicated now." That night, I went to bed feeling lonely and misunderstood. Linda's insidious comments had invaded not only our home, but also our marriage, making me question whether the love Mark and I shared could withstand this constant barrage of negativity. As the third year of our marriage unfolded, a sense of unease settled in my heart. The once bright flame of our love seemed to flicker under the shadow of doubt and mistrust. It all started with repeated phone calls from a name that kept popping up on Mark's phone, Jake. Mark's demeanor changed whenever that name flashed on the screen. One evening, as we watched TV, his phone rang again, and I couldn't help but notice the nervous glance he threw my way. "Who's Jake?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart pounded. "Just a new guy at work, no one important," Mark replied, but his voice was too nonchalant, and his answer seemed rehearsed. Mark's behavior continued to shift. He started coming home late from work with flimsy and inconsistent excuses. His wardrobe underwent a transformation, shifting from casual to sharply tailored suits. One night, as he prepared to leave for another late night at work, I questioned, "Working late again?" noticing his dressed-up appearance. "Yeah, big project," he said without meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." Frustration boiled over, and I confronted him one day, saying, "This isn't like you, Mark. What's really going on?" My voice trembled with a mixture of anger and fear. Mark sighed, displaying a mix of guilt and annoyance. "I told you, it's just work. Why can't you trust me?" I shot back, "Because you're hiding something. You're never here, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away." Mark didn't respond. He just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me standing there feeling more alone than ever. That night, lying in our empty bed, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. The next morning, I called a private detective. It felt like a betrayal, but the constant worry and uncertainty were eating me alive. I needed answers and was determined to get them, no matter what they revealed about the man I thought I knew. The days after contacting the private detective were a haze of anxiety and anticipation. I felt like I walked a tightrope, desperately trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, while my world quietly crumbled around me. Then the call came, shattering my last hope. "Mrs. Johnson, we have conclusive evidence. I'm afraid your suspicions were correct." The detective's voice was solemn, heavy with the weight of the news he was delivering. He explained that Mark had been having an affair, and the mysterious Jake on his phone was actually a woman. My heart sank as he detailed their meetings, providing timestamps and photos. It was irrefutable. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of devastation and vindication. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were cold, hard facts. Despite the pain, I decided not to confront Mark immediately. I needed more than just the evidence of his infidelity. I needed to understand the full extent of his deceit. One evening, as I passed by his home office, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Mark was talking to his mother, Linda. "Mom, I'm planning to end it with Clara after your birthday." Mark's voice was cold, devoid of any affection he once had for me. "Oh, that's wise, dear. Make sure she gets me a nice 65th birthday present before you drop the bomb." Linda replied, her voice laced with a callousness that took my breath away. I leaned against the wall, feeling nauseous. Not only was my husband unfaithful, but he and his mother were plotting against me, waiting to use me for one last expensive gift before discarding me. Fueled by a mixture of anger and resolve, I decided to play along. I continued as if nothing was wrong while secretly gathering more evidence of Mark's infidelity. The detective provided me with everything: photos, videos, and even audio recordings. I was building my case, preparing for the moment I would strike back. As I lay in bed each night next to the man who had betrayed me, a plan began to form in my mind. I would wait until after Linda's birthday. I would give them the illusion of victory. Let them think they had outsmarted me. But when they least expected it, I would reveal everything and turn the tables. As Linda's 65th birthday approached, I put on a mask of ignorance, acting as though everything was normal. Inside, I was a cauldron of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a fierce determination to see my plan through. A few days before the birthday, Linda casually mentioned her upcoming celebration during a family dinner. "So, Clara, I'm expecting a grand 65th birthday. You must have planned something special for me," she said with a sly smile, clearly anticipating a lavish gift. Keeping my emotions in check, I replied with faint enthusiasm, "Of course, Linda. I've arranged a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant. It'll be a night to remember." Her eyes lit up with glee, not realizing the trap I was setting. "How wonderful! I can't wait. Just a small family gathering, right?" she asked. "Yes, very intimate and exclusive. Just for close family," I confirmed, my words laced with hidden irony. Later that night, Mark approached me, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "That's quite a generous plan for Mom's birthday. Are you sure about this?" I looked at him, maintaining my composure. "Absolutely. It's a significant birthday, and I want to do something special for her." Mark seemed appeased, but I could tell he was puzzled by my willingness to indulge his mother. As the day of the dinner drew near, I managed the final arrangements meticulously, confirming the booking under Linda's name, double-checking the guest list, and ensuring everything was in place for the grand evening. Playing the role of the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, I concealed my true intentions beneath a facade, ready to expose the betrayal and deceit that had corroded our marriage. The night before the dinner, as I lay in bed, a twisted sense of satisfaction enveloped me. I was mere hours away from turning the tables on Mark and Linda. They believed they were using me for one last benefit before discarding me, unaware that I held the reins of the game. The evening of Linda's 65th birthday unfolded in a luxurious restaurant, every detail meticulously planned to reflect the grandeur of the occasion. While Linda reveled in the opulence, I played the part of the gracious daughter-in-law, masking my inner turmoil with a practiced smile. As the dinner drew to a close, the waiter presented the bill, a hefty $4,500. With a steady hand, I reached for my card, my heart pounding. After swiping the card, I glanced around the table, observing Linda's satisfied smirk and Mark's uneasy expression. "Thank you for such a wonderful evening, Clara. This is truly generous," Linda said, her voice dripping with insincerity. Seizing the moment, Mark leaned in with a mocking tone. "By the way, Clara, I want a divorce." His words struck me like a physical blow, but I refused to let them see my pain. Linda chimed in sharply. "Well then, I guess you should leave. This is a family gathering after all." Without a word, I stood up and left the restaurant, my dignity intact despite the turmoil inside. As I walked away, I swiftly canceled the payment on my phone and blocked the shared account, ensuring Mark couldn't cover the cost either. Back at home, I packed my belongings quickly, the finality of my actions setting in. I was leaving this chapter of my life behind, stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. Soon, my phone erupted with calls. I answered, and Linda's voice, shrill with rage and panic, filled my ears. The payment didn't go through. The restaurant staff called the police. "What have you done?" Her words were a cacophony of anger and disbelief, but I remained silent, letting her tirade wash over me. This was their doing, their betrayal and manipulation coming back to haunt them. After hanging up, I looked around the empty house, once filled with dreams and love, now just a hollow shell. I took a deep breath, stepped out the door, and didn't look back. Their calls continued, desperate pleas for help that I no longer felt obliged to answer. I had closed that chapter of my life for good. In the end, they paid. Mark had to borrow from his parents, but I didn't care where the money came from. It was a small compensation for the betrayal, but more importantly, it was closure. Sitting in the lawyer's office, signing the last of the papers, I felt a sense of peace. The journey had been painful, full of betrayal and heartache. But I had come out stronger, more resilient. Walking out into the sunlight, I felt like a free woman ready to start anew. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. After all the darkness, I finally felt like I was stepping into the light.
As I sat at my parents' Thanksgiving table, surrounded by the familiar sights of my childhood home, I felt a rare calm. These visits, now that I was 60, provided a peaceful escape from the tense atmosphere at my own house. My daughter Emma chatted happily with her grandmother, their voices filling the room with joy. It was a stark difference from the quiet, strained conversations I often had with Richard, my husband. Suddenly, my phone buzzed loudly, interrupting the warmth of the moment. Richard's name appeared on the screen, instantly making me uneasy. Taking a deep breath, I excused myself from the table. "Sorry, it's Richard. I'll just take this in the kitchen." But as I stood up, I accidentally activated the speakerphone. "Hey Elaine, enjoying yourself there?" "Well, don't bother coming back." Richard's voice sounded oddly cheerful, echoing through the room. I froze, holding the phone as his words hung in the air. "What do you mean, Richard?" "Oh, I've decided it's time for a change. I've moved Emma's stuff into the house. There's no room for you anymore." The room fell into silence. Emma dropped her fork with a loud clatter, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Richard, what are you talking about?" My voice trembled as I spoke, my heart racing. "It's simple. Emma doesn't want to come home because of you. Without you around, she can live the life she deserves, like when she was younger. So, you need to leave." Emma stood up suddenly, her face flushing with anger. "Dad, what is going on?" "Stay out of this, Emma." Richard's voice cut her off, icy and firm. "This is between me and your mother." My cheeks burned with a mix of shame and anger. "You want me to leave our home just like that?" "Yeah, find some shelter or whatever. It's not my problem." The call ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence. My mother reached out, her hand trembling. "Elaine, honey." Before she could finish, Emma burst into bitter laughter. "He's lost it, Grandma. Completely lost it." Inside, I was a whirlwind of emotions, shame, anger, and a strange feeling of freedom. He better be ready. I thought to myself, this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. That night, lying in my childhood bed with moonlight casting shadows, memories flooded back. Richard and I hadn't always been distant and cold. There was a time when his eyes held warmth and his touch felt safe. I met Richard when I was in my late 20s. He was charming, confident, and seemed to have all the answers. His charisma drew me in, and within a year of meeting, we were married. A whirlwind romance that felt like a fairy tale. But the fairy tale began to crack soon after Emma was born. Richard adored our daughter, but as his love for her grew, his feelings towards me seemed to diminish. It was as if there was only room in his heart for one person. "Elaine, can't you see? You're suffocating her. Give her space," he would scold. Whenever I tried to be part of Emma's life, his words hurt, though I thought he was just being an overly protective father. As Emma grew older, Richard's resentment towards me deepened. The man who once cherished me now barely acknowledged my existence except to criticize. "Why can't you be more like Emma? She's only 10 and already so independent," he'd sneer. I remember the night Emma, at 15, won a school award. We were supposed to celebrate together as a family, but Richard turned it into a lecture. "Elaine, why can't you achieve anything like our daughter? You're wasting your life." His words pierced like daggers. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling years of his disdain weighing on me. It wasn't just his words, it was the dismissive looks, the heavy sighs, the way he'd turn away when I entered a room. I had become invisible and insignificant in my own home. That night, lying in the silence, something stirred inside me. Richard's callousness, his disregard for our life together, it ignited a determination in me. I refused to let him erase me from my own story. Turning on my side, I closed my eyes, but sleep eluded me. The shadows seemed to whisper, urging me to rise up, to reclaim myself. And deep down, I knew I was ready to take that step. The next morning, I woke up with a newfound clarity I hadn't felt in years. During breakfast, Mom tried to talk about Richard's call, but I changed the subject. I wasn't ready to confront that issue just yet, and Emma sensed my hesitation and didn't push. As we tidied up, my mind wandered back to the years with Richard. His controlling behavior wasn't limited to our daughter. It permeated every part of our lives, tightening like a vice around my freedom. "Elaine, don't stay late at work. You need to be home to cook," he would insist, dismissing my job at the library that I loved. His rules were unpredictable and meant to keep me off balance. If I wore something he didn't like, he'd scoff. Trying to impress someone, focus on being a better wife and mother. Even my friendships weren't safe. "You spend too much time with Linda Sheck, a bad influence," he once said, cutting through years of friendship. But it wasn't just the control, it was the humiliation at social events. He'd undermine me with fake compliments, often in front of Emma. "Elaine tries her best, but you know she's not the brightest bulb," he'd laugh, his words a painful reminder of his contempt. Emma witnessed it all. At first she tried to defend me, but Richard's influence was overpowering. "Mom, just ignore him," she'd whisper, her eyes filled with frustration. I couldn't forget the day Emma left for college. Richard glowed with pride, yet there was a coldness in his gaze when he looked at me. "See, Elaine, this is what happens when you raise a child right. She's not like you, thank God." Those words cut deeper than anything, implying I had no role in our daughter's upbringing, that my years of love and sacrifice were worthless. As these memories swirled in my mind, a simmering anger rose within me. Enough was enough. I wouldn't let Richard control my life any longer. The phone call had been the final straw. It was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. I looked at Emma, seeing her determination reflected back at me. "Emma, there's something important I need to do when we get home. It's going to change everything, but I need you to trust me." Emma nodded firmly. "I'm with you, Mom." Completely. The drive back was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts, knowing we were heading towards a crucial confrontation with Richard. Once home, I excused myself to my room under the guise of unpacking, but really to make a call that would set everything in motion. I dialed the number of a divorce attorney I had discreetly noted down months ago. My hands trembled as the call connected. "Hello, this is Elaine Richardson. I need to discuss filing for divorce." Mr. Adams, the lawyer, was calm and understanding. "I can help you through this, Mrs. Richardson. It sounds like you're dealing with a challenging situation." As I recounted Richard's behavior over the years, Mr. Adams listened attentively. "We can file for divorce on grounds of emotional abuse. It seems like you have a strong case." Feeling empowered, I responded firmly, "I'm proceeding with this, and I want him to face consequences both legally and financially." Mr. Adams reassured me, "We'll work to ensure you receive what you're entitled to." After the call, a mix of fear and exhilaration washed over me. For the first time in years, I was taking charge of my life. Later that evening, Richard returned home, his demeanor smug and victorious. "Back so soon. Realize you have nowhere else to go." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "I went to my parents' house, Richard. Remember the place you practically forced me into?" He scoffed. "I did us a favor. Emma and I are better off without you." "That's where you're mistaken," I said firmly. "Emma isn't a pawn in your games, and I'm not your captive anymore." Richard's face twisted in anger. "What nonsense are you talking? You think you can survive without me?" Meeting his gaze, my resolve remained steady. "Watch me." Emma entered the room, her expression showing determination. "Dad, you've crossed a line. Mom doesn't deserve this." Richard sneered. "Oh, now you're on her side? I thought you understood, Emma. Your mother is worthless." Emma's eyes flashed with anger. "No, Dad. The only worthless thing here is your cruelty. We're done living under your control." As we stood together against Richard's hostility, I knew we had reached a turning point. The battle lines were drawn, and I was prepared to fight for my freedom. The morning after our confrontation, the atmosphere in the house felt tense. Richard's usual arrogance was heightened, as if he was challenging us to defy him. While making breakfast, my hands trembled slightly, but my determination held strong. At the table, Richard broke the silence with his usual condescension. "So, Elaine, have you finally realized your place? Ready to beg for forgiveness?" I kept my voice steady. "There's no need for me to beg, Richard. It's you who should be reflecting on your actions." He laughed bitterly. "You've always been out of touch, Elaine, but this is a new low." Emma, who had been quiet until then, spoke up firmly. "Dad, this isn't a joke. Mom is serious about filing for divorce." Richard's face twisted through confusion, disbelief, and then erupted into anger. "Divorce? You think you can just walk away from me after everything I've done for this family?" "It's because of what you've done," I interjected, my voice firm. "Years of belittling, controlling, and humiliating me. I won't tolerate it any longer." Richard slammed his fist on the table, his face flushed with rage. "I built this family. Without me, you're nothing." Emma stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly. "You didn't build this family, Dad. You've torn it apart. And Mom isn't just something. You've treated her like nothing." His eyes darted between us, a wild intensity growing. "You're ganging up on me, your own husband, your own father." "This isn't about sides, Richard," I said evenly, the turmoil churned inside me. "What you've done is unforgivable." Richard's bitter laugh filled the room. "You think you can leave and everything will be fine. You have no clue what's coming." I met his gaze firmly. "I know exactly what I'm facing, freedom from you." Emma stood beside me, resolute. "We're done with your control, Dad. It's over." Richard abruptly stood, his chair crashing behind him. "You'll regret this, both of you. You have no idea what I'm capable of." As he stormed out, the tension he left behind was suffocating. But in that tension, there was also a profound sense of liberation. The battle had begun, and I was ready to fight for my freedom, my dignity, and my daughter's future. The days after our confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind of activity. I met with Mr. Adams multiple times, meticulously planning the divorce proceedings. "We'll ensure you receive what's rightfully yours, Elaine, both financially and legally," Mr. Adams assured me. Richard's reaction to the divorce papers was explosive. He barged into the house one evening, papers in hand, his face a mask of rage. "You're really going through with this? Do you even understand what you're doing, Elaine?" I faced him calmly, despite my inner turmoil. "Yes, Richard, I do. For the first time in years, I'm making a decision for myself." Richard laughed mockingly. "You really believe you can survive without me? You're nothing without my money, my support." "I'm not afraid of being on my own, Richard. I'm more afraid of spending another day under the same roof as you," I replied firmly. Emma, hearing the argument, came downstairs. "What's going on?" "Your mother has lost her mind," Richard sneered. "She thinks she can just take half of everything I've worked hard for." "It's not just what you've earned, Dad. It's what Mom has endured all these years. She deserves every penny and more." Emma shot back. Richard's gaze hardened. "Don't be naive, Emma. This will destroy us all." "No, Dad, it will liberate us, especially Mom." As the days stretched into weeks, our home became a tense, silent battlefield. Richard relocated to the guest room, his presence casting a heavy shadow over everything. Despite his attempts to sway me, my decision was resolute. The day of our first court hearing arrived. Sitting in the courtroom, waiting for proceedings to commence, I felt an unusual calmness wash over me. I knew deep down that I was making the right choice, not just for myself, but for Emma too. Richard, however, appeared visibly nervous. When his lawyer broached the topic of a settlement, a small smile crept onto my face. Richard, who had always prided himself on control, was now at the mercy of the legal system. As the judge reviewed our case, Richard grew visibly paler. When the judge turned to me and asked if I wished to add anything, I took a steadying breath. "Your Honor, for years I endured emotional abuse and manipulation at the hands of my husband. I seek not vengeance, but justice, for myself and for my daughter." The judge nodded solemnly. "I understand, Mrs. Richardson. This court will ensure a fair and just resolution." Leaving the courtroom, I caught Richard's defeated expression. It was enough for me to know that while the battle wasn't over, I had won this initial round. I was prepared for whatever lay ahead. In the weeks that followed, my life felt like it was constantly under scrutiny, analyzed by lawyers and the court. But with each passing day, I felt stronger, more in control of my own destiny. Richard's attempts to intimidate me grew more desperate and less effective over time. The final court hearing became a day I both dreaded and eagerly awaited. As Richard and I sat across from each other in the courtroom, I couldn't help but reflect on the man I once loved, now a stranger filled with bitterness. The judge's voice was unwavering as he delivered the verdict. The court rules in favor of Mrs. Richardson. Mr. Richardson, you are obligated to pay alimony and half of your assets. Richard's face twisted in shock and anger. He abruptly stood up, his chair crashing to the ground. This is ridiculous. She doesn't deserve a single penny. Mr. Richardson, control yourself, the judge admonished firmly. The court's decision is final. As we exited the courtroom, Richard's parting words dripped with venom. You'll regret this, Elaine. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the end of me. But I no longer feared him. His once cutting words now sounded hollow and powerless. Over the following months, I secured a small apartment near Emma's place. I began a new job at a local library, a place that always brought me solace. The alimony from Richard provided me with a financial independence I hadn't known in years. Emma and I grew closer, our relationship no longer overshadowed by Richard's presence. She flourished in her career and personal life, a stark contrast to the fearful young woman she once was. As for Richard, the last I heard, he was leading a diminished life, his pride and finances greatly reduced. His attempts to reconnect with Emma and me were met with silence. The man who once wielded so much power over us now exists only as a memory, a faint echo of the past. Often, I sit on my balcony with a cup of tea, gazing out at the tranquil neighborhood. Here, I found a sense of peace and purpose that eluded me for so long. Emma visits frequently, and we share conversations about everything and nothing. Our bond, forged in adversity, has grown unbreakable. Looking ahead, I face the future with hope and a profound sense of freedom. Emerging from the shadows of my past, I've grown stronger and more resilient. I've come to understand that sometimes the most challenging battles lead to the greatest triumphs. As for Richard, he remains nothing more than a distant echo, a reminder of a life I once lived and the strength I discovered in leaving it behind.
You're terrible at cooking, James. Go freeze outside with your failed meal, she yelled, slamming the window shut and locking it. I hurried to the window, pleading for James to open it as I pounded on the glass. But he just smirked and closed the curtains. The cold started to creep in, and I began to shake. My body, warm just moments ago from the heater, was quickly losing its heat. What will happen if it stays this cold? Even my baby inside me. I was about to faint from the freezing cold when someone suddenly reached out to help. Are you okay? The next day, I came back home with him. James was outside, freezing naked. I was stunned at the sight, but Lamb stepped forward. Isn't that what you said? If you can't cook properly, then freeze outside. Liam gave James a stern look and spoke in a cold tone. James, shivering in the yard, could barely muster a response. I'll call for an ambulance out of kindness. Emily, do you have anything to say to him before it arrives? I nodded and stepped closer to James. My name is Emily Smith. I'm 28 years old and stay at home. When I was working, my mom got sick and passed away. Then, my dad suddenly died from a heart problem. I was left all alone since I'm the only child. It was really hard being by myself, but I kept busy with work. Emily, are you okay? You seem stressed. During that tough time, my husband James was there for me. He comforted me when I felt sad and alone. Eventually, we fell in love and got married after dating for a few years. We're so happy to have such a wonderful woman in our family, my in-laws said. James, you've brought home a great lady. After our wedding, I moved in with James' family, and we all got along great. Emily, I saw a new cafe near the train station on TV. Let's check it out sometime, James suggested. Sure, I'd love to. I especially bonded with my mother-in-law and we made it a tradition to go out for a meal once a week. I also connected well with my father-in-law, who enjoys cooking, and we've cooked together in the kitchen a few times. I'm happy you're getting along with my family, but what about my younger brother? He can be a bit of a handful, James asked. Oh, he's fine. Liam, my brother-in-law, and I don't talk much because he works from home and stays in his room most of the time. But when I showed interest in his work, he explained it to me in detail. So, I've been getting along well with James' family. A few years later, I found out I was pregnant with James' child. Because of how bad my morning sickness was, I decided to quit my job. I think that's a good call. Don't overdo it, James agreed. Deciding to quit wasn't just my choice. I talked it over with James' family. Both James and Liam make enough money for us to live comfortably. I also have savings, and with my father-in-law working and my mother-in-law having a part-time job, quitting my job won't cause any issues. Wow, pregnant women have it easy. No work, no complaints, someone remarked. Lately, James has been complaining about me not working. But during our discussions about me quitting my job, James was actually the one who suggested it first. He said, "You're just freeloading without a job, acting all high and mighty." Who's acting high and mighty? I'm the one who always cleans up after you, I retorted. I've always been competitive, so I wanted to prove James wrong. If you had a problem, you should have spoken up during our discussions. You were the one who brought it up, right, James? Instead of complaining, focus on your own responsibilities. My parents-in-law agree with me and support my decision. James feels left out. He and Liam don't get along, so Liam never supports James. James looks down on me because I work from home. He doesn't listen to me and doesn't think I'm helpful. Liam whispered this, which is why he doesn't join our conversations. James doesn't like this, and when we're alone, he complains even more. Just because my family likes you doesn't mean you should act all high and mighty. I'm not acting that way. Everyone is just being reasonable. Even when it's just the two of us, I never used to lose arguments to James. But when the morning sickness started, I lost the energy to argue. Pregnancy isn't an illness. If you're not working, James thinks you're just lazy. I agree. Pregnancy isn't an illness, but Emily is putting in a lot of effort to nurture another life. That's hard work in itself, Liam acknowledged. Liam started helping out too. Whenever James complained to me, Liam would step in and tell his parents. While James got scolded by them, Liam took care of me. At this rate, it's hard to tell who the real father is, I joked, rubbing my belly. With my in-laws keeping an eye on things, I hoped James would eventually change. Until then, I kept trusting him. Oh, James isn't back yet? No, not yet. Suddenly, James started coming home late all the time. He claimed it was because of overtime, but I wasn't sure if that was true. Even on his days off, he'd say he was working late or got called in unexpectedly and wouldn't come home at all. I began to suspect James was cheating, and so did his parents. We tried to gather evidence together, but it was tough to catch him in the act. He always seemed to be at the office, and we couldn't find any evidence of him seeing another woman. Well, we can't really know what's going on inside the company, his parents said. I asked one of his coworkers, but she said everything seemed normal. Hey, Emily, take it easy, she told me. My morning sickness got so bad that I couldn't do any housework. But my father-in-law cooked, my mother-in-law helped with other chores, and Liam pitched in, so everything was okay. You should be ashamed of yourself. Lying around all day, not doing any housework, even though you're a homemaker? Why are you even here? James, who had seen his parents doing chores, woke me up one night just to say that. When I looked upset, Liam replied, "That's rich coming from someone who's not pulling his weight as a husband. Every time you challenge me, even though I'm the eldest. Well, you're not exactly the role model type of brother. You've always been a bit of a know-it-all," Liam retorted. The argument between the brothers escalated, almost turning physical, before their parents stepped in to stop them. After hearing what happened, their parents scolded James, saying, "That's enough. Do whatever you want. Wait, James, where are you going without talking to me? James left without a word. I'm really sorry about that. We'd apologize, their parents said to me in place of James, and the situation calmed down. However, James's behavior has been worsening, and something needs to be done soon. I was at a loss for what to do. Is everything okay? One Saturday, my in-laws had planned a trip for a local event. Despite arranging it beforehand, they were worried about leaving me alone due to James's recent behavior. I'm concerned about leaving you, my mother-in-law said. I'll be fine. My morning sickness has eased up a lot, I assured them. They left with concern, and around the same time, Liam had overnight commitments. I'm sorry for leaving at this time, Liam said. It's okay, take care, I replied. Not long after they left, Liam also departed. James was unusually at home that day, still asleep. Despite not feeling my best, I decided to get up and do things around the house. I didn't want to risk James's criticism if I stayed idle. Thankfully, my father-in-law had prepared plenty of dishes and stored them in the fridge. I started cleaning and doing laundry, taking it easy on myself. Hey, breakfast! James finally woke up close to noon, still looking grumpy with messy hair. He demanded breakfast, and I rolled my eyes, grabbing some leftovers from the fridge. What's that? Leftovers your dad made you? You can't even cook as a homemaker, James remarked. His comment annoyed me. Why does he say things like this? Doesn't he realize I'm pregnant with his child? There's no excuse for his behavior. Sorry, but right now, my main job is taking care of our baby. Household chores can wait. How dare you talk to your husband like that? James shouted at me, but then Liam barged in, breaking the tension. I could hear them arguing loudly outside. You stay out of this. James snapped at Liam before storming off to his room, muttering angrily. As expected, James made a racket and then left the house. Liam let out a heavy sigh. You okay? Liam asked as he entered the room. Yeah, what brings you here? I replied. I just came to pick up something I forgot, Liam explained, looking at me with concern. I chuckled, noticing how much he resembled his mother. It's all right, go ahead. Don't worry about me, I assured him. Okay then, I'll head out, Liam said, hesitating for a moment before leaving. I couldn't help but wonder, where did the James I first met go? At this rate, it seemed like divorce was inevitable. But I still wanted to remain close to my in-laws. Feeling suddenly drained, I decided to lie down. And before I knew it, I fell into a deep sleep. Emily, time to wake up. James's voice interrupted my sleep. I mumbled as I sat up. I met James's eyes, expecting him to scold me. However, he gave me a wry smile. I'm sure I'll get an earful from James later, I thought. I wanted to let you sleep, but it's already evening, James said in a surprisingly gentle tone. I was shocked by his kindness. I've prepared dinner, so when you're ready, come join me, he added before leaving the room. I noticed a blanket over me and couldn't help but wonder if James had covered me. I went to the kitchen and found my father-in-law's dishes already warmed up, ready to eat. I'm sorry, Emily, James said sincerely. When I found out we were having a baby, I was thrilled, but then I got overwhelmed and took it out on you. This cake is my way of apologizing. James presented a cake to me. Honestly, this gesture couldn't erase all the past hurts, but his genuine apology warmed my heart. For now, I decided to forgive him and enjoy our meal together. Look, it's snowing, James exclaimed excitedly. Oh, you're right. Let's go see, I replied, following him to the window. The sight of the snow falling against the night sky was beautiful. Since I came from a place where it rarely snowed, this was a special moment for me. Without hesitation, I moved closer to the window. Let's open it, James suggested. But it'll be cold, I protested. Just put on a jacket. He insisted as he draped one over me and opened the window, letting in the chilly wind. As I braced myself against the cold, James hugged me. Suddenly, I found myself outside, and when I turned around, I saw James grinning mischievously. You're a homemaker who doesn't do the housework. That makes you a bad wife. Think about that tonight, he teased. Excuse me? What are you saying? You can't even cook, I retorted. With that, James shut and locked the window. I rushed to the window, pleading with James to open it as I pounded on the glass, but he just grinned and closed the curtains. The cold was starting to make me shiver. My body, warm from the heater just moments ago, was rapidly losing its warmth. What am I going to do if this continues? Even my baby inside me, just as I felt like I might pass out from the cold and shock, someone reached out to me and asked if I was okay. They helped me into their car. Why were you out here at this time of night? It was Liam, who had come home earlier than planned because he was worried about James. The car's heater warmed me up, and I felt relieved. We should go to the hospital, just to be safe, Liam suggested as he drove me there. Thanks to his quick action, both my baby and I were okay. While I was being examined, Liam arranged for a hotel where we could stay. He left to take care of something else. I'm so relieved. You're going to be a strong baby, right? Feeling reassured, I rubbed my belly. I was grateful that nothing serious had happened. Exhausted, I fell asleep as soon as I lay down on the bed. Oh, Emily, are you feeling better now? Liam asked as we left the hospital. Yes, I'm completely fine now. Thank you so much, I replied gratefully. No problem, shall we head home? Liam suggested. The next day, as we arrived home, I was shocked to see James freezing naked in the yard. Liam approached him with a cold gaze and tone. This is what you said, right? If you can't cook properly, then freeze outside. James, shivering, couldn't even respond properly. I'll call an ambulance out of kindness. Emily, do you want to say anything to him before it arrives? Liam asked me. Nodding, I stepped closer to James. It's because of you that our baby was almost in danger. I will never forgive you. Just wait, I told him firmly. James was taken to the hospital. Later, I asked Liam what happened last night after he dropped me off at the hotel. Liam returned home alone and found James sleeping in the living room, naked with another woman who seemed to be his mistress. James had brought her home, thinking we wouldn't be there, and with me locked out, he seemed confident. Liam, furious, threw James out of the house in his birthday suit, telling him to think about his actions. Then Liam interrogated the shocked mistress, gathered evidence, and sent her back to her place. It turned out she had a family too. By the time Liam informed them of everything, dawn was approaching. He took a short nap in the car and then came to pick me up. That's how everything unfolded. I've talked to my parents. They said they're coming home today. Liam told me with a gentle smile, staying by my side until they returned. It's going to be okay now, Liam. Thank you so much, I said gratefully. Nah, I just did what needed to be done. Thanks to him, I could feel safe at home, Liam replied. I'm so sorry, that idiot. I can't apologize enough. James immediately apologized upon their return and faced their wrath. James was forced to pay child support, and it was decided that he would be kicked out. I'm so sorry. It was just a mistake, Emily. I truly love only you, James pleaded, but I ignored him. I wish he'd stop treating me like a fool, I thought to myself. Suddenly, James became aggressive, raising his hand at me. Enough is enough, my Dan's son. Liam intervened, grabbing and twisting James's arm. With the help of my father-in-law, James was easily overpowered, and I felt relieved. I really just lost my mind for a moment. Emily, James said remorsefully as he was thrown out by the two men, while I was comforted by my mother-in-law. He was pathetic until the very end, I thought to myself. As for James, that's all I ever thought. By the way, Liam's pretty strong, isn't he? Considering what just happened and how he tossed a full-grown man outside, Emily remarked. Oh yeah, he used to do combat sports back in the day. I wouldn't recommend trying that move on just anyone though, Liam said with a smile. Emily felt a flutter in her heart at his smile, and her mother-in-law laughed upon noticing. With such good looks and strength, It's surprising he doesn't have a girlfriend," her mother-in-law teased. Liam bashfully looked away, which Emily found endearing. From then on, Emily decided to stay and be cared for in her in-laws' home since she had no other family or reliable person to turn to. "If you'd allow, I'd love to hold your baby," her mother-in-law said. "Of course, anytime," Emily replied. "Right now, the four of us are eagerly awaiting the birth of my precious baby," Emily thought to herself. Talking to Liam, Emily found out that James the Fair was with a junior from his office. No wonder she wouldn't spill the beans when asked, Emily thought. The two of them were sneaking around and getting cozy at various spots. Once I reported it to the junior's husband, he did a thorough investigation. With that evidence, my divorce process went smoothly. Both of them got fired for fooling around during work hours and for claiming their dates as business expenses, Emily recounted. "Thank you for all the help," Emily said to Liam. "Well, it's only natural to want to help someone you love, right?" Liam replied, his face turning beet red. "Wait, what?" Emily was surprised, and both of them blushed. Then Emily found out that Liam had feelings for her for a long time. "I always thought I should hide these feelings," Liam confessed. "I never imagined he felt that way about me," Emily thought. "Honestly, I'm not ready to be in a relationship like that right now," Emily said. "I understand, but if you can wait a bit, I want to explore these feelings," Liam said. Emily smiled, and Liam smiled back happily. "I'm going to do everything I can to make you see how much I care," Liam declared. "Okay, I'll be ready for that," Emily replied. Liam's parents overheard their conversation during dinner, which was really delicious. "Looks like Liam has a girlfriend now," his mother teased. Liam blushed and responded playfully. "Both his father and I laughed at that," Emily remembered. "Afterwards, I gave birth to our lovely daughter right on time," Emily proudly shared. "She's so cute." "Congratulations. She looks just like Emily. Adorable," Liam's parents said. "I don't want to let her go," Liam said happily, embracing his role as a father. Years later, I happily married Liam again, and our daughter calls him Daddy. Liam adores her. Emily remembered fondly. "I think our next child will be a boy," Liam guessed. "Yeah, that would be cool if he's like me. But having a boy who looks like you would be awesome too," Liam added. "I'm pregnant with our second child now. Our daughter is thrilled about becoming a big sister," Emily said happily. "We're all thinking of names together. It seems like our daughter's suggestion might win," Emily laughed. "I'm going to make Emily our daughter and the new baby happy," Liam promised. "Don't forget about yourself in that promise," Emily said with a smile. "We're planning to live happily ever after, all 6 of us together, having fun and getting along. That's our plan," Emily concluded. "We can't wait to go out together as a family once the new baby arrives." I stood before Julia, announcing my decision with a stern resolve. "I'm moving in with my parents. If you're against it, then let's get a divorce," I declared, my voice devoid of any emotion. Julia looked at me in disbelief, her mind racing to comprehend the audacity of my words. The impact was like a slap across her face. "What are you talking about, Ellen?" she stammered, her voice reflecting a mix of shock and confusion. "It's simple," I continued, my eyes cold and calculating. "We'll use your $2 million inheritance to build a house there. That's the plan." A knot tightened in Julia's stomach. The inheritance, her mother's final gift, was now a tool in my scheme. "You can't be serious," she whispered. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Julia. It's time to make some changes," I replied sharply. Memories of our life together flashed through her mind. The laughter, love, the birth of our children. How did we end up here? At 38, a mother of 2, she had thought she was living a normal life with a man she once loved. But now I stood before her, a stranger. You have no right to decide how my inheritance is used, she protested, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief. As your husband, I think I do. It's either my way or the highway, Julia. Decide. I declared, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. She stared at me, trying to find a trace of the man she married. But all she saw was a greedy stranger eyeing her inheritance like a vulture. Realization hit her standing in the shadow of the man she no longer recognized. Her marriage was a lie. Fine, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. If that's how you want it, we're done. But don't expect to touch a dime of my money. My smirk vanished, replaced by shock. I hadn't expected this. I turned on my heel and left, slamming the door behind me. Alone, Julia stood there, her heart pounding. The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer just about money. It was about her dignity, her freedom. The next morning, the house felt eerily silent as Julia prepared breakfast. The previous night's confrontation replayed in her mind, fueling her anger. How could I be so callous? The money was a part of her mother's legacy, not some windfall for me to squander. Our children, Emma and Ryan, noticed the tension but remained quiet. They were too young to understand the complexity of adult conflicts, yet they sensed something was amiss. Julia forced a smile for their sake. After dropping them off at school, she drove to her mother's empty house, echoing with memories. Sitting in the living room, she recalled the times my parents had made insensitive remarks about their lifestyle, choices, and even their children. They had always favored traditional gender roles, and unfortunately, I seemed to have inherited their archaic views. I can't comprehend why you're still working. Alan's mother once sneered, her disdain evident. A woman's place is at home with her children. Alan, my husband, never stood up for me. He consistently brushed off his parents' derogatory comments, urging me to ignore them. However, their words were like needles, steadily pricking away at my self-esteem. Now, with my mother gone and my marriage falling apart, I felt a surge of resentment towards Alan. He had never truly been my partner, leaving me to fend for myself against his parents' criticisms and never once taking my side. I vividly remembered when I was pregnant with Emma, and Alan's parents openly expressed their hope for a grandson. When Emma was born, their disappointment was palpable. Next time, make sure it's a boy, they had said, barely concealing their dissatisfaction. Witnessing my daughter subjected to such blatant favoritism was painful. Now, Alan wanted to use my inheritance to move closer to them, to immerse ourselves in their toxic environment. The thought made my blood boil. I couldn't and wouldn't let that happen. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my mother's life, a plan began to form in my mind. I refused to be bullied into submission. I would fight back not just for myself, but for my children too. Alan had revealed his true colors, and it was time for him to face the consequences. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for war. Over the next few days, I gathered documents and prepared for the legal battle ahead. My lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named Miss Henderson, assured me that we had a strong case. Don't worry, Julia. We'll make sure that inheritance stays where it rightfully belongs, she said with a confident smile. One evening, as I sorted through my mother's belongings, I stumbled upon an old, dusty envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside, I found a set of documents, stock certificates and property deeds. My hands trembled as I realized the extent of my mother's secret savings, including the current value of the stocks and the property. It amounted to a staggering $2 million. I couldn't believe it. My mother, who had lived so modestly, had been sitting on a small fortune. She had always been prudent with money, but I never imagined she had accumulated so much. A note accompanied the documents, written in her neat handwriting. Julia, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it gives you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely. Tears welled up in my eyes. My mother's foresight and love felt like a warm embrace even from beyond the grave. The next day, I decided to confront Alan. He needed to know that his plan to squander my inheritance was doomed to fail. I found him in the living room, lazily flipping through a magazine. Alan, we need to talk. I said, my voice steady. He looked up, a hint of annoyance in his eyes. What is it now, Julia? I discovered something of my mother's. I began, holding up the envelope. Turns out, she left me stocks and properties worth $2 million. Alan's eyes widened, a mix of shock and greed flashing across his face. 2 million? That's great news, he exclaimed, his reaction disgusting me. Don't get any ideas, Alan. This money is mine and the kids. You won't see a cent of it. His expression turned dark. You can't keep it all to yourself, Julia. We're married. What's yours is mine, he retorted. I felt a surge of anger. You've shown your true colors, Alan. You don't care about me or the kids. All you see is dollar signs. Alan stood up, his face red with anger. You're being selfish, Julia. I'm thinking about our future, about our family. What family, Alan? The one you're ready to abandon for your own selfish needs. I shot back. He took a step towards me, fists clenched. You'll regret this, Julia. I'll make sure of it. I stood my ground, unwavering. Bring it on, Alan. I'm not afraid of you anymore. He stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter battle, but I was ready for my children, for my mother's legacy, and for myself. The following week was a whirlwind of legal consultations and tense silences at home. Alan's attitude had shifted from shock to a cold, calculated aggression. He was like a caged animal, desperate and dangerous. One evening, as the kids were asleep, Alan cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes were wild, his posture aggressive. You think you're clever, Julia. Hiding that money from me, he accused. I leaned against the counter, my heart pounding but my voice steady. It's not about being clever, Alan. It's about what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your deluded fantasies. He slammed his fist on the countertop, making me jump. I am your husband. I have rights to that money. You're just a... His words were like venom, but I cut him off. A what, Alan? A woman who won't bow down to your greed and bullying. His face contorted in anger. You'll regret this, Julia. I'll make sure you don't get a dime of that money. I could feel the danger in his words, but I refused to show fear. Is that a threat, Alan? He leaned in, his breath foul. It's a promise. I pushed past him, my body shaking with adrenaline. We'll see about that. The court will decide. As I walked away, his voice followed me, filled with malice. You're going to be left with nothing, Julia. Nothing. The next day, I received a call from my lawyer. Julia, Alan has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of fear and determination. Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way. Miss Henderson's voice was firm. We have a strong case, Julia. Don't worry. We'll make sure justice is served. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my children sleeping peacefully in their rooms. I dedicated myself to this battle for my children, for their future. Alan had transformed into a stranger, a man driven by greed and malice. Yet I was no longer the woman he believed he could control and intimidate. As I closed my eyes, I pictured the courtroom, the judge, and the final verdict. I envisioned myself standing tall, fighting vigorously, not just for the money, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had always exemplified. This was my battle, and I was prepared for it. The ensuing legal battle was arduous. Alan's strategy was transparent, to portray me as an uncooperative wife, hoarding the family's resources. However, his arguments were feeble, more rooted in desperation than in law. One afternoon, we faced each other in mediation, a final attempt to settle before the court hearing. Alan sat across from me, his lawyer by his side, his gaze cold, and his demeanor smug. Let's be reasonable, Julia, his lawyer began. Alan is entitled to a portion of this inheritance. It's only fair. I glanced at Miss Henderson, my resolve unyielding. Fair. Alan has made no contribution to this inheritance. It is solely from my late mother, intended for me and my children. Alan leaned forward, his voice scornful. Come on, Julia. You're just being spiteful. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a share? I felt a surge of anger. This isn't about spite, Alan. It's about justice. You've never cared about what the kids want. This is about your greed. His lawyer tried to interject, but Alan signaled him to stop. You think you can just take everything, don't you, Julia? Play the grieving daughter and the victimized wife. I met his gaze squarely. This isn't a game, Alan. You're the one trying to take what isn't yours. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a stern face, interjected. Let's try to remain civil. This is about finding a resolution. Alan cut her off, his voice rising. A resolution? She's the one being unreasonable. I could feel the tension in the room, thick and suffocating. I spoke calmly yet firmly. I am being perfectly reasonable. I'm protecting what my mother left for her grandchildren. Alan's claims are baseless. The mediator called for a break, sensing the futility of the discussion. As we stood up, Alan leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear. You'll pay for this, Julia. I'll make sure of it. I walked out of the room, my heart racing but my spirit unbroken. Alan's threats were hollow, his case weak. I knew the law was on my side, and I was determined to see this through to the end. In the following weeks, I immersed myself in legal documents, met with Miss Henderson, and prepared for the court hearing. The kids stayed with my sister, shielded from the worst of the storm. I missed them terribly, but I knew this fight was for their future as much as it was for mine. The day of the hearing arrived. Standing in the courtroom, I braced myself to confront Alan and whatever deceptive narrative he planned to weave. This was the moment of truth, and I was prepared to fight with every ounce of strength within me. The courtroom felt like a battleground where words were the weapons, and Alan's lawyer crafted a tale of a wronged husband, deprived of his rightful share. Yet, under Miss Henderson's skilled questioning, his arguments crumbled like a fragile house of cards. During a recess, Alan cornered me in the hallway, his face twisted in fury. You're ruining everything, Julia? You think you're going to walk away with all that money? I stood my ground despite the fear gnawing at me. It's not your money, Alan. It never was. He stepped closer, his voice a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as it takes. I'll bleed you dry in legal fees. Meeting his gaze, my voice remained unwavering. Do what you must. I won't let you bully me into submission. As we returned to the courtroom, a strange sense of empowerment washed over me. Alan's threats were hollow, his bravado a mask for desperation. The final verdict was a vindication. The judge ruled in my favor, acknowledging the inheritance as my sole property. Alan's face, as the judgment was delivered, reflected defeat. However, the victory was bittersweet. I had won the legal battle, but at the cost of my marriage, the family I had known shattered. In the weeks that followed, Alan's life unraveled. His reputation, built on lies and intimidation, crumbled. The community saw him for the greedy man who had attempted to take advantage of his wife's inheritance. Rumors reached me about his struggles, lost job, lost friends, lost standing in the community. It was a steep fall from grace, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of poetic justice. One evening, a mutual acquaintance called. Julia, have you heard about Alan? I hesitated. No, what about him? He's moving out of town, lost his job, his house. He's pretty much broke. I felt a pang of not quite satisfaction, but something close. Alan had reaped what he had sown. He had tried to destroy me, but in the end, he had destroyed himself. I hung up the phone and looked at the picture of my children on the mantel. This fight had been for them, for their future and security. As I tucked them into bed that night, I felt a sense of peace. The battle was over, and we had emerged stronger. We were free from Alan's shadow, ready to start a new chapter. Our lives would be different, but we would be okay. We were together, and that was all that mattered. In the months following the court ruling, life settled into a new rhythm. The victory in court gave me a sense of closure, but marked the beginning of a new journey, one of healing and rebuilding. I decided to sell the house, the scene of so many bitter memories, Each item I packed was a step away from my past with Alan. I was determined to create a better future for Emma and Ryan. While going through some old boxes in the attic one day, I found a picture of Alan and me in happier times. For a moment, I allowed myself to grieve for the life I thought I had, the love I thought was real. But as I looked at his smiling face in the photo, I realized that the man I had married no longer existed. He had shown his true colors, and they were dark and ugly. I tossed the photo into the trash bin, a symbolic gesture of letting go. Moving to a new town brought a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a friendly neighborhood, and the kids enrolled in a new school, soon making friends. I focused more on my writing, finding solace in the worlds I created with my words. One evening, as I was tucking Emma into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was, but we're better off now. We're a strong team, just the three of us. She nodded, a wise look in her young eyes. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home." Her words filled me with warmth. We had indeed come a long way. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on Alan's downfall. His greed and malice had backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I harbored no joy in his misfortunes, there was a sense of justice in how things had turned out. The kids and I had a long road ahead, but we were on the path to healing. The inheritance, now securely invested, would provide for their education and our future. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had saved us. In her wisdom, she had given me the means to protect myself and my children. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and in its wake, it had left clarity and hope. We had weathered the worst, and now a new day was dawning.
I filed for divorce. I'll be taking the house and the car. I know it will be tough, but hang in there. I'm not sure how much time you have left, but I hope you can push through. It might sound like kind words, but in reality, they were sharp and cutting. His smile at that moment hurt me more than anything. How could he do this to me? Leave me when I'm sick? Wasn't our promise to face challenges together? I can't stop crying from the shock of his words and attitude. There's no way I can forgive him. I intend to make him feel my pain, even if my body can't bear it anymore. This firm determination signals the start of my next step, a journey of revenge. My name is Anna. At 45, I've always been a dedicated housewife taking care of my family. I used to enjoy every day with my husband, Tom. Just like old times. We met through a friend's introduction. He's always been sociable, able to connect with anyone. When I was nervous at first, he reached out to me with a warm smile, and I quickly opened up. Our days together were as sweet as colorful candies, so delightful that I'd lose track of time. I genuinely wanted to spend even more time with him, and maybe he felt the same, cherishing our moments together too. It's hard to believe now, but we loved each other deeply and promised to marry. Living with him felt like a dream. Every day sparkled, and I believe we always share smiles in the future. But as time went on, Tom began to change, likely due to the stress from his job. His salary isn't that high, he didn't pursue specialized qualifications in school, and lacks a strong academic background, which limited his job choices. I suggested trying a new job a few times, but he always responded reluctantly, "I'm good for now." While I'm working full-time and we don't have any financial issues, I worried about what would happen if we had a child or if I got sick and couldn't work. To alleviate this anxiety, I made a suggestion. "Tom, my company's short-staffed in administration. You don't need any special qualifications, just the basics. Interested?" One day, a friend from my company's HR told me about an opening in administration. I thought he might be interested and suggested it, believing it could be a good opportunity to improve his challenging job situation. But his reaction was cold. "Why are you making decisions about my job without asking me? I chose this place myself. Are you saying there's something wrong with it?" I was taken aback. I had simply made a suggestion out of concern for his future. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you with that sudden proposal. I just thought the conditions at your current job seemed tough, and maybe this company would be a better fit for you. But he didn't take it that way. Just because you're my wife doesn't mean you can interfere in my career decisions as if you were a stranger. I have my own thoughts, you know. As he walked away, I murmured to myself. The word stranger resonated deeply. I am his wife, and we are a family, yet his words and attitude felt like they were meant for someone else. A crack was growing between us, widening rapidly. Tham had also been harsh with my family. My mother, a truly kind person, would regularly visit our home while I was away for work. She cleaned and cooked delightful meals, storing them in the refrigerator as her way of checking in on us. I was grateful for her kindness. I often invited my mother over for dinner, but lately, Tham seemed increasingly irritated by her presence. When he came home and saw her in the living room, he'd snap, "You're here again." Both my mother and I were taken aback by his remark. It made me question the state of our relationship and our future. How could we bridge the growing gap between us? My mother, with a gentle smile, said, "It's all right, Anna. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, I apologize. I'll leave earlier today." Hearing her say that, especially when she's always gone out of her way to help us despite her busy schedule, was heart-wrenching. "Tham, please think about how Mom feels," I pleaded. "She's always looking out for us. Please show her a little respect." Tears welled up in my eyes, changing the room's atmosphere. I remembered all the times my mother had brightened our home and couldn't understand why Tham would speak to her that way. When I come home after working hard every day, all I want is to relax. It's exhausting to have someone else around all the time in my own house. I tried to understand Tham's perspective, but I couldn't shake the appreciation I felt for my mother. Honestly, I didn't think I was wrong. It felt like Tham was being stubborn, but I wasn't sure how to express my feelings in a way he'd understand. My mother said, "Don't worry about it. If everyone's happy, that's all that matters to me," and gave me a comforting smile. Her warm words filled me with overwhelming guilt. That night, as I enjoyed the delicious meal she had cooked, my emotions were a jumble of appreciation and remorse. I couldn't stop thinking about Tham. I spent countless nights pondering how our relationship could improve, but a much larger challenge emerged at work. I suddenly felt dizzy and fainted. Thankfully, my colleagues acted quickly, calling an ambulance and rushing me to a nearby major hospital. The medical tests started, but everything seemed like a blur. I tried to reach Tham, but he didn't respond. Then I received the diagnosis: cancer. Fortunately, it was caught early, and with proper treatment, the doctors said I'd be okay. Still, I knew cancer treatments could be grueling, so I steeled myself for the long and challenging road ahead. I told Tham about the diagnosis and my hospitalization, but his response was indifferent. His silence made me feel incredibly lonely, yet I chose to focus on my treatment, believing that moving forward was the only option. The cancer treatment was tougher than I'd imagined. My health deteriorated rapidly, forcing me to stay in bed most of the time. One day, amidst this struggle, Tham finally appeared in my hospital room. "How are you feeling?" he asked casually. "Well, it's pretty rough," I replied, half jokingly. "It might have been a bit easier if you were by my side." To be honest, I was frustrated by his attitude. Why hadn't he come sooner? His support could have made a world of difference during these trying times. Instead of feeling relieved about our reunion, I was left feeling more isolated. I found myself increasingly irritated as I reflected on our past. Then, what Tham said next left me genuinely shocked and stunned. "I filed for divorce. I'll take the house and the car. I know it's tough, but hang in there. I don't know how much time you have left, but I hope you keep fighting." "Wait, are you serious?" I exclaimed. "Divorce?" A storm of questions raged within me. Didn't we promise to always stay together? I always believed that true couples would overcome challenges together. Tham's words confused me and left me feeling detached. I whispered to myself, "I don't need him anymore. I'll move forward on my own. I'll just forget about him." I decided that he would regret underestimating me, but first, I needed to end our relationship properly. "I get it. I'm sorry for everything. Keep the house, the car, whatever. If you want compensation money, I'll pay. Thanks for everything," I said. Tham looked surprised at first, but soon his expression shifted to a smug smile. "I didn't expect you to accept it so easily. I thought you'd throw a tantrum. Anyway, take care of yourself and don't bother inviting me to your funeral." As I watched him leave the room, a smile spread across my face. He didn't realize he had walked right into my trap. It would be interesting to see how his life changed now. I called a colleague from a company I knew. Hello, long time no talk. I have a favor to ask. Can you help? At first, he sounded surprised, but once I explained, he agreed. All right, let's give it a try. Everything was set. Imagining Tom's shocked and anxious face made me smirk. This new sense of excitement even boosted my motivation for my medical treatment. A few days passed, and one afternoon after my treatment, I noticed that my cell phone had received 200 missed calls from Tom. The thrill of waiting for his call was oddly satisfying. Once I calmed down, I called him back and heard his shaky voice on the other end. Anna, help me. I never expected this, he pleaded. Imagining his distressed tone made me chuckle. This was exactly what I had planned. Trying to sound concerned, I said, Tom, tell me what happened. He took a deep breath before saying, my name's on the company's layoff list. I can't believe this is happening. Listening to his panicked voice, I smirked, knowing everything was unfolding just as I had orchestrated. The person I had contacted was the head of sales at our company. I had asked him to reconsider the business dealings with Tom's company. Initially confused, he reviewed the transaction history and decided it was best to choose a different partner. That's why Tom's company started calling me. That's when I decided to reveal something I had kept to myself. You know, there are rumors in your company about you and the new girl. Everyone likes her because she's so cheerful, and there are whispers about an affair. Is that true? I could hear disbelief in Tom's voice. Are you serious? You can't be serious. This has to be a joke. His surprise was understandable. After all, who would think an ordinary employee could influence his work? Well, actually, I said, I'm the CEO of this company. There was a pause. I could tell Tom was speechless on the other end. It's no lie, I continued. That's how we've been living so comfortably. My annual income is around $1 million. Your regular salary wouldn't have been enough to support your shopping habits. The truth was, Tom's spending habits were out of control. The $1,400 allowance he received from me was like a second salary, yet it was never enough. He rushed out and approached me with a pleading tone. Can I have a little more? At this rate, the money he receives from me might end up surpassing his actual salary. Most people would have abandoned such a luxurious lifestyle for something more stable, but since I earn $1 million a year, giving Tom a $1,400 allowance each month isn't a big deal for me. I've always wondered what he spent that money on. Tom, yesterday was payday, wasn't it? I asked. I've always given you extra money on payday, but that might be difficult from now on. We're not a couple anymore, and it's only natural that you can't expect that monthly allowance since we're divorced. I wondered how he would manage from now on. Oh, and be careful with the mortgage on the house. It's $2,000 a month. I know it'll be tough, but you'll need to manage it well. If you're late with the payment, you might have to leave the house. While a $2,000 loan isn't a burden for me, it's a significant amount for Tom. From his reaction, it was clear he was confused and in disbelief, repeatedly saying things like, really? And that's crazy. What I said was the truth. This is the result of my efforts to maintain our relationship, yet he took advantage of me when I was by his side, pursuing only his own desires. Maybe it's time he faced the consequences of his actions. Why did it come to this? I've been laid off and now have to figure out how to get by. How am I going to pay the rent this month? Despair was evident in his voice. He must have felt lost and uncertain about how to move forward. If I were in his position, I find it hard to imagine a brighter future. I understood that Tom's situation must be overwhelming and confusing, but it was a direct result of his past disrespectful behavior. If he had shown genuine care for me and my family, things wouldn't have turned out this way. This is the consequence of his choices. Had he truly respected us, he wouldn't be facing such troubles. Tom remained silent, perhaps at a loss for words. I felt a mix of pity and amusement. Was this it? Could I hang up now? Just then, he spoke in a panicked voice. Wait, can we reconsider our relationship one more time? I know it sounds selfish, but I realize now how important you were to me. The idea of starting over with him made my heart race. After all the pain he caused me and how he abandoned me, the thought of going back felt daunting. He took a deep breath. I know I've been reckless lately, and I'm really sorry I couldn't visit you in the hospital more often. But once you're better, let's go somewhere peaceful and have a relaxing time together. I want to see your smile again. His words felt nostalgic, reminiscent of what he said when he proposed. He promised a life filled with laughter and happiness. Back then, I was so swept up by his words that I jumped into the relationship without thinking. Married life, however, proved difficult, especially with his reckless spending habits. Maybe if I had understood him better, things could have been different. Tom's voice grew weaker. Anna, I can't live without you. I want to be by your side and face life's challenges together. Can we start fresh, just one more time? His voice was filled with sadness and a hint of desperation. Despite the emotion, it was hard to trust him after everything that had happened. Stop it already, we're done. I've chosen a new path, and I can't go back, I said firmly. There was a trace of sorrow in his voice, but I could sense he genuinely wanted me back. Please let me say one last thing. I truly love you, Anna. If you ever change your mind, I'll be here. I could have been swayed by his words, but I had made a decision about my future and our relationship. I wouldn't be influenced by his sweet talk any longer. Enough. Words like that will change my mind. Think about it. Don't you have another girlfriend? Shouldn't you focus on her? I knew about Tom's new relationship from information provided by his boss. His declarations of love now seemed hollow. I realized he'd say anything convenient to get what he wanted. It was frustrating that he only reached out when he needed something and turned away when times got tough. We couldn't be together anymore. Spend quality time with her and forget about me. I won't be reaching out, but if you need to contact me, speak to my lawyer. Take care of yourself, Tom. His pleas seemed sincere, but letting him go would probably mean his life would become more difficult. That was his choice. I had my own life to move forward with. I wanted him to stand on his own 2 feet. I hung up and adjusted my settings to block any further contact from him. According to my lawyer, Tom repeatedly tried to reach me. My decision was firm, so the lawyer respected it and provided no details about me. Unexpectedly, my lawyer suggested pursuing damages. Initially, I hadn't considered it, but it seemed like a way to seek compensation. I knew Tom and his new partner weren't wealthy. There were rumors about his serious debts. Upon investigating his affair partner, I found she had fled due to financial issues. When I contacted her family, they were furious and had her working hard at home. Actions always have consequences, and it seemed they were facing theirs. I had overcome cancer and made a full recovery. My speedy recovery even surprised the doctors. Returning to the office, I found a letter on my desk from the supportive sales manager. His heartwarming words touched me. When colleagues heard I was single again, some kindly offered to set me up. But after my past marriage, I wanted to cherish my time and focus on myself for now.
I initiated the divorce proceedings, deeming a financially struggling spouse to be of little value. My world was shaken when, during a business trip, my husband abruptly declared not only his intent to divorce, but also his simultaneous marriage to his lover. To add insult to injury, he accused me of marrying him solely for his wealth and demanded I forfeit any claims to our property. Confronting my indifferent husband, who had always treated me with disdain since our marriage, led to his unraveling and a downward spiral to rock bottom. I am Karen, 35 years old, raised by a single mother since my father's passing in kindergarten. Despite the financial challenges, we found happiness as a family of 3. Even as an adult with a decent salary, my frugal habits persisted from childhood. I married John, a wealthy man I met through an acquaintance, drawn to his kindness and the new world he presented. Our differing views on money and gender roles emerged after marriage. While John envisioned a traditional household, I was dedicated to my career and financial independence. Before marriage, John suggested I become a homemaker, assuming I would embrace traditional domestic roles. However, I expressed my desire to continue working until we had children, emphasizing the financial benefits. Although I managed to convince him, the reality of balancing work and household chores proved challenging. Despite being a full-time employee, my days were consumed with domestic responsibilities, leaving little time for us as a couple. In contrast, John, adopting a traditional husband role, contributed nothing to household tasks. While he witnessed my busy schedule, he simply indulged in dinner and relaxation upon returning home. Balancing work and domestic responsibilities took a toll on our relationship, prompting me to question if this was the essence of a marriage. Despite my efforts, I hesitated to voice my dissatisfaction, fearing he might insist I quit my job despite his lack of contribution at home. I had hoped that the arrival of children would bring about a positive change in our relationship. Unfortunately, our connection had grown distant, casting doubt on the possibility of expanding our family. Feeling the urgency to discuss this matter, I approached John. "Hey, we should start considering having kids, right?" "Huh? Kids? You're quite energetic, considering you're tired from work and chores." "It's not about that. I want to have children. We haven't been married that long, but I'm already over 30. Women have a limited time to have children, and it's getting harder for me to conceive as I get older. It's almost too late. But we don't need kids. If we have one, you'll expect me to help, right? You know I'm busy with work, and I won't help with child rearing." Declaring you won't help with child rearing even before they're born is strange, isn't it? I plan to raise them alone, but shouldn't you at least have the intention to help? It's your child too. Child rearing is your job. I'm working to support the family, so I definitely won't help with the kids. You'll just complain that I don't help, making me the bad guy. You must have been indoctrinated with poverty and lots of kids since birth. We're not poor. We don't need kids. End of discussion. John abruptly ended the conversation, retreating to his room. Alone in the living room, tears overwhelmed me. My desire for children was not only rejected, but my upbringing was also mocked. Following this incident, our relationship deteriorated rapidly. Communication became scarce, and the possibility of having children seemed more distant. As I continued to juggle work and home responsibilities, taking on significant projects at work, I found myself increasingly distant from John. One day, when informing him about an upcoming business trip, his unexpected kindness surprised me. He wished me well and hinted at a big surprise upon my return. Despite having given up on him, his smile shook my resolve. However, my faint hope was shattered upon returning home. The front door wouldn't open, and John revealed the first surprise. He had changed the locks. The second surprise was the announcement of our divorce. He claimed to have forged my signature and submitted the papers with a friend as a witness. Inside, he presented a document for me to sign, waiving my rights to property division. Protesting the false accusations, I insisted on a mutual renunciation of property rights, intending to make it a public document. John, stubbornly retorting, redid the document on his computer, initiating a tense exchange. As I left the house, he continued to scorn me for being poor, even contemplating discarding my belongings. A few days later, John, in a state of panic, called me, wondering what I had done. "What do you mean I haven't done anything? Why are you panicking?" "I have a lot of questions. First, I was told to leave the apartment." "Oh, you were still living there. That's not allowed. It's a new month. You're trespassing." "Trespassing? But it's my house. Are you okay? Did you forget that it was a company apartment I rented? I was the leaseholder, so naturally, you can't live there anymore." "That's ridiculous. How could you do this? I can't believe you didn't know. I'm not the one who should be accused of doing things on my own. Didn't I tell you that you can't just change the locks of a rental apartment? It's my house. I can change the locks if I want. Didn't you listen? It was my leased apartment. Even if you were the leaseholder, the owner is the apartment manager. You can't change the locks without informing them." "Is that so? Also, I terminated the lease while you changed the locks. I was allowed to live there until this month. I was planning to return. But now you've unlawfully altered someone else's property, which could be criminal damage. Wait, why did you terminate it so early?" "Criminal damage? Is that why the police are at the front door now? I'm too scared to open it." But I calmly replied, "So the police did come. Don't worry, it's probably not for trespassing or criminal damage. It's better to talk to them." "Why do I know about the police?" "Because I reported you for filing the divorce papers yourself. It seems like you've committed crimes like forgery and fraudulent use of a private document. Divorce papers can be filed by one person, but only with mutual agreement and personal signatures. Since John forged my signature and the witness, it's obvious that it's a crime. But he seemed unaware of his guilt. I continued pressing further. So the divorce papers you submitted are invalid, and your marriage with Susan can't happen either. How do you know about Susan? Did you think I knew nothing? I had a private detective agency thoroughly investigate your affair with Susan. It was a busy time at work, and coordinating with the agency was tough. Plus, you even held a grand wedding ceremony while I was supposedly on a business trip. Are you okay? Your business trip was a lie. Yes, I took leave from work despite being busy to do some research and prepare documents. I knew about you bringing Susan home. It would have been impossible to gather this evidence while working. After I revealed everything, John was speechless and seemed quite downcast even over the phone. Then he pleaded with me, "Please don't tell Susan I'm divorced." Why would I? There's no such fact to tell. Really? Thank you. Are you misunderstanding something? When did you become divorced? That fake divorce paper is invalid, remember? So legally, you're still my husband, not divorced. What? So since you committed adultery, well, legally, my husband, Susan needs to pay compensation. I sent the demand for reparation to her house yesterday by express delivery. She didn't know you were married, right? Then I can't withdraw the claim at this point. I already knew Susan believed John was single, but I deliberately sent the reparation demand. Susan hasn't contacted me yet, so maybe she hasn't received the letter. It should arrive soon. Should you be on the phone with me when you also have to deal with the police? You're busy? I'll ignore the police. I won't be arrested. I'm going to Susan's house now to get the letter back before she or her family can accept it. He then hung up. He probably went straight to Susan's house to wait for the postman at the front door. I knew it would be futile because the letter was sent as registered mail to Susan only. Even if he waited for the postman, he couldn't receive it. A few hours later, a dispirited John called me. According to him, there was an incident when the postman arrived. Finally, I'll take that envelope. Who are you? You don't live here, right? I'm practically a resident here since I'm married. I have the right to receive the mail. I see, but I can't give you this envelope. It's registered mail for Susan only. What? Give it to me. Absolutely not. If you're so eager, ask Susan for permission. What's going on here? Oh, John, what's all this noise? What's happening? Ah, Susan, this is registered mail for you. This man insisted on taking it. Sorry for the disturbance. Now I'll be on my way. What's this? A demand for reparation. John, you are married. What's going on here? Sorry, it's just, she's an ex-wife from a long time ago. I was embarrassed to say I'm divorced. I'm sorry for keeping it secret. But it's strange, isn't it? We haven't been dating long, and a demand for reparation? If you were divorced before we started dating, there shouldn't be any problem, right? Well, my ex-wife is crazy. Maybe she's demanding reparation out of spite because I got married. That was the excuse he gave, but such a lie was quickly exposed. The envelope included a letter I wrote along with my contact information, so Susan called me directly. In that call, I told her about the affair, the invalid divorce, and that they had a wedding ceremony while he was still married to me. Although they had a wedding ceremony, they hadn't submitted the marriage registration yet. John wanted to submit it on April Fool's Day, so it was still pending. He probably delayed submitting the marriage registration due to uncertainty about whether the divorce was finalized. After being exposed, John fled from Susan's house and shamelessly contacted me again. I still had something to tell him, so we agreed to meet at a nearby cafe. As soon as I arrived, John said, "Karen, please withdraw the reparation claim. Let's pretend we've been separated for a long time and officially divorced now. I can apologize to Susan for being secretly divorced and maybe cover it up. You think I'm desperate to stay married to you. I was going to file for divorce anyway, but since you cheated, you'll pay reparation. Just trying to extort money from me, huh? Typical of the poor. You have such a poor heart. You're talking nonsense. Depending on my answer, everything can change. There's still an option where we don't divorce. If I say no, you can't reject it, meaning you can't marry Susan, and your marital status will be exposed. Fine, I'll pay the reparation. Just divorce me now. Sign here. Then, about property division. Property division? How much more do you want to take from me? Reparation should be enough. Remember, we agreed to waive property division, right? So let's make it official. All right. You're not as bad as I thought. Thank you. We then went to a public notary, made a public document for reparation and property division, and then to the city hall to submit the divorce papers, finalizing our divorce. Relieved, I exchanged final words with John. Glad we don't have to divide property. What are you saying? I'm the one who benefits from that. By the way, do you even have assets after paying me reparation? Susan will also claim damages. She mentioned charging you for the wedding expenses. That's impossible. I'm marrying Susan. She can't claim that. We're divorced now, so there should be no problem. Still living in a fantasy. You committed marriage fraud. You had a wedding while still married. You think Susan still believes you. Marriage fraud? That's ridiculous. Susan will believe me. Believe that if you want. I heard from Susan directly. Also, weren't the guests at your wedding paid actors? You still owe them. You knew about that. I haven't paid them yet. What does it matter to you? You could have just taken property division and been better off. That's what I wanted to tell you. Even if we had divided property, you would have benefited more. What are you talking about, poor woman? Your family is poor, and you only make $15,000 a year, right? Even if you got a raise, it would be barely $20,000. You don't have any property. You keep calling me poor, so I thought you might be mistaken. Yes, my salary is indeed $15,000, but you know I work for a foreign company, right? It seems you have no interest in me, but I became a director of the American branch. It's not $115,000 per year, but per month. $155,000 per month. So that's an annual income of $1.8 million. You're still bad with numbers. How do you manage to keep a job? It's $180,000 a year. $180,000? That can't be true. Of course, I haven't had the chance to spend such an amount, so I've been saving it for the future. The savings from before our marriage aren't part of the property division, but there's still a considerable amount since our marriage. So I could have received half of that in the property division. You are my destiny after all. I'll get the divorce papers corrected. Are you okay? After all the contempt, you think I'd gladly undo the divorce if you have that much money. You don't need to claim reparation, right? It's just a small amount for you. He who laughs at 1 cent will weep for 1 cent. This reparation is for the mental anguish you caused me. I'd like to claim more honestly. And since we've made it official, make sure to pay it even in installments. I'll be penniless. Also, don't go back to that apartment. Your belongings should have been moved to your parents' house by now. You thought I had few belongings, but that was because I had already moved. Most of them were. Were you that indifferent to me? I can't have so little. So I have to go back to my parents' house. They don't know anything yet, do they? Let me explain. Don't say anything. I've already told them everything. It's only right to explain why we're divorcing. Oh, and your father said, don't ever step over our threshold again, so I have nowhere to go. He collapsed, and I left the cafe. Later, I heard he caused trouble at the police station. Despite my advice, he went back to the apartment. He sat there aimlessly in the empty apartment until the manager called the police, and he was taken away. I'm not sure if it was for obstructing public duties, trespassing, or for the falsified divorce papers. Eventually, his parents took responsibility for him. After talking with me and learning about Susan, they decided that apologizing and paying damages to Susan's family came first. They went to Susan's house to apologize, kneeling in front of her family. They settled everything without pressing charges for marriage fraud, even paying for the wedding expenses. I had expected them to sue, so it was disappointing they didn't. So, I decided to pursue legal action against him for forging the divorce papers. John offered a settlement, but I didn't withdraw the lawsuit. I didn't want him to think everything could be solved with money. I wanted him to be convicted and understand the gravity of his actions, even if it cost time and money. I left everything to my lawyer, so it wasn't too burdensome for me. Even though it took time, John, exposed for his actions and the marriage fraud at his company, couldn't stay there anymore. After being detained by the police and subsequently absent without leave, he was eventually fired. He ended up living at his parents' home, working all day at a relative's construction company. His father took all his earnings, leaving him with no income. I thought his parents wouldn't abandon him, but they were stricter than I expected. They paid my reparation and Susan's compensation, planning to make him work like a horse until he repaid everything. He lived in a shed-like place with no electricity, receiving only $5 per day for food, deducted from his salary. They planned to disown and kick him out once he's repaid everything. A harsh fate after years of hard work. I was offered a position at the head office abroad, so I moved overseas after the divorce was finalized. I worried John might come to me for help or harbor resentment, but moving abroad alleviated those concerns. I thought work would be my partner for a while, but soon I found a new relationship. I'm now dating a foreign executive at our head office, and I'm pregnant with plans to marry soon. I told him everything about my past and my ex-husband, and he's understanding. I'll take maternity leave and plan to return to work later, supported by him. He's enthusiastic about taking paternity leave and co-parenting, showing a different cultural perspective. After being tormented by my ex-husband, I finally feel I'm grasping true happiness and confidence in building the happy family I'd always dreamed of. Many suffer due to selfish spouses, and while divorce isn't always the right choice, enduring silence isn't a virtue. It's important to know that honest discussions can lead to resolutions, and sometimes divorce is a necessary option. If the ownership of this house isn't transferred to me, I'm contemplating a divorce. I was taken aback when my husband suddenly dropped this bombshell. This house holds precious memories of our family, and I can't bear to part with it. Despite my emotional attachment, my husband is threatening me, toying with my feelings. Distraught, I reached out to my father for help. I am Emily, a 30-year-old full-time housewife, dedicating my days to supporting and managing our household. I married John 2 years ago, and since quitting my job after marriage, my husband has been the breadwinner. However, our peaceful life took a turn for the worse after my father-in-law's passing, leading to my mother-in-law moving into our apartment. Surprisingly, I was informed about my mother-in-law's move the day before she arrived. Nonchalantly, my husband announced her impending arrival as if it were the most natural thing. It caught me off guard, and I questioned the suddenness of it. I forgot to mention earlier that my mother would also be coming to live with us from tomorrow. As soon as my husband came home, he casually mentioned her arrival, asking me to prepare and clean up. I was bewildered by the news. I thought she was coming over for a visit, but my husband clarified that she was moving in. The decision was made without any prior discussion with me, and the very next day, my mother-in-law arrived with numerous luggages. It's been a while. I'm glad you look well, Mary. Please come in, I greeted her. However, she seemed displeased for some reason. As she entered, she questioned why I didn't come to pick her up, emphasizing that it's common sense to meet at the station, especially when you know your mother-in-law is arriving. While carrying the hefty luggages, I didn't know what time you'd arrive. In that case, shouldn't you have contacted me? You're so thoughtless. I apologize. This is why they say some daughter-in-laws are useless and inconsiderate. Grumbling, the mother-in-law settled heavily on the sofa. Despite being a guest in our home, she acted as if she owned the place. I couldn't believe it. From that day on, her snide comments became even more intense. As soon as my husband left for work, the barrage began. Emily, why are you sitting there? Do the dishes. You should have finished the laundry in the morning. That's common knowledge. I'm sorry, I'll do the laundry once the dishes are done. You have the wrong priorities. In my house, it's a rule to do laundry immediately after breakfast. But that rule is just to do as you're told. Haven't your parents taught you not to make excuses? I had my own daily routine, and it seemed that Mary couldn't understand that I wasn't refusing to do the work. Even if I did things her way, she would still find fault and complain every day. The daytime hours alone with her were especially challenging. One day, I had an epiphany on how to end this living hell with my mother-in-law. The plan was to move to the house I inherited from my father and live in a separate home from her. My father retired early a few months ago, and my parents started a new life in the countryside. They then passed on their house to me. Fortunately, that house isn't too far from our current apartment, and we were planning to move eventually. Living with my mother-in-law had reached my limits, so I decided to talk to my husband about moving sooner. John, can we talk for a moment? What's up? Anything happened? Remember the house my father gave us? What do you think about moving there? Oh, that house. We did talk about moving there someday. Why the sudden decision? Well, I've been having some difficulties with your mother. She never mentioned anything, but I can't bear living with her anymore. That's why I'm seriously considering moving. Observing that the new place isn't too far, I suggested we move there, allowing my mother-in-law to stay in the current apartment. Surprisingly, my husband agreed to the move. After informing Mary, we decided to make the move a week later. Honestly, I anticipated some opposition from her, but she accepted our decision with a big smile. Goodbye, John and Emily. I'm so sorry for the sudden decision to move. Don't worry about it. It's wonderful that your father gave you the house. He's very sweet. Thank you. Please visit us sometime. Of course, it's not too far from here, and I hope you visit me regularly too. I will. After the conversation, I headed to our new home with my husband, feeling relieved that I wouldn't have to endure snide remarks anymore. I could now live freely at my own pace. Although I had initially feared Mary's opposition, consulting with John brought me peace. However, my peace did not last. Despite being able to keep my distance from my mother-in-law and reduce stress, my husband started coming home late. It wasn't just the late returns. There were days when he wouldn't come home at all. He defended his actions, saying he was worried about his mother, but it became too frequent. Without informing me, he went to her house, had dinner with her, and sometimes stayed overnight, disrupting my daily life. This can't go on, I thought one day. I sat him down for a talk. John, you've been coming home really late lately, and sometimes you don't even come home at all. Is that so? I'm just worried about my mother. That's not the point. At least let me know beforehand that you'll be late, so I'll know I don't have to prepare dinner. Since you're a housewife and always at home, you can eat the leftovers for lunch the next day, right? So you're saying I should just accept everything quietly because I'm a housewife. Are you saying we shouldn't talk about this? Isn't that the truth? Housewives just relax at home. What? What are you saying? Anyway, I'm worried about leaving my mother alone. Ellie will be coming back soon, and I need to discuss some things with her. Wait, Ellie is coming back. What does he need to discuss with her? Curious, I asked my husband. We're moving Ellie here to live with us. Live together? Yes, she kept saying she wanted a big house like the one she lived abroad. That's why I thought of letting her stay in this house. What? I don't understand. Suddenly informed of this, I couldn't think of anything. Is my sister-in-law going to live in this house? I had barely escaped from Mary's constant complaints, and now his sister, Ellie, was going to live in this house. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This was the house I inherited from my father. It felt unnatural. It's the only big house that would satisfy Ellie, my husband argued. The apartment where we used to live is now where my mother stays, and it's too small for 4 people. But I never intended to live with Ellie. I don't plan to live together either. I intend to give this house to Ellie, my husband declared. What? Why? Because we plan to move back with my mother. Ellie can use this house freely, he explained. I was taken aback by my husband's unreasonable proposal and felt like fainting. Despite my repeated insistence that I had no intention of living with my mother-in-law, my husband eventually became furious. "Can't you be a little more considerate? You can live because of me, so just do as I say. Enough is enough of your jokes. This house is precious to me, inherited from my father. Why should I give it to Ellie? Such a wonderful house is wasted on you, isn't it? I've already told Ellie that I've got her a large house. It's too late to say otherwise now. I wasn't consulted in any of this decision. Either way, I can't accept it. You're always complaining. Enough. Calm down and think. I'll go back to my mother's for a while." My husband angrily slammed the door and left. Left alone in the room, tears streamed down my face. I couldn't understand why my husband decided everything on his own. It's unimaginable that he intends to give away the house I inherited from my father to my sister-in-law. Every day, my husband sent me messages asking if I had calmed down and to come back soon. Each time, I had to firmly tell him that I had no intention of agreeing. Then, one day, he said something shocking over the phone. "Hey, Emily, when will you come here and live with me? Stop nagging. I've said it so many times. I have no intention of living with Mary. Moving there and giving this house to Ellie. I've already told Ellie. Stop being selfish. She might be coming back this week, so there's no time. Why should I give up my house for your family? I inherited this house from my father. Don't decide on your own. Who do you think you're talking to? Even my mother is furious. I'm at my wit's end. That's not my problem. You're ignoring my feelings," I responded. My husband let out a big sigh over the phone, clearly frustrated. Then he said something shocking. "If you can't listen to me, then let's divorce. Hand over the house to Ellie. Leave by tomorrow." At that moment, my love for my husband quickly faded. Threatening me with the word divorce was utterly despicable. I couldn't possibly forgive him for using divorce as a threat without considering someone's feelings. I couldn't allow these people to have their way. Burning with anger, my husband continued to speak with a triumphant and dominating tone. "Listen, if you don't leave by tomorrow, I'll really divorce you. Got it?" "Wait, are you serious?" "Of course I am. You don't have a choice. What will you do if you, a housewife, get divorced? You can't survive. Enough, I get it. Good. Hurry up and move over here. My mother is looking forward to disciplining you." He hung up the phone with a confident tone, thinking I would do as he said. After that call, I made up my mind and decided to seek help from my father for a plan. The next day, everything was ready for the move. I replied calmly when asked, "By the way, I'm curious about when Ellie will be back." "She'll be back tomorrow. Why are you so obsessed with Ellie? Between you and me, she seems to have made a lot from stock investments." "I see. So if you provide her with a house, maybe you can ask for financial help." "That's so like you. Anyway, you need to leave that house by today. It's inconvenient for all of us. Don't worry, I've already moved." "What? What do you mean?" My husband seemed genuinely surprised. "I knew it. You don't want to divorce me, do you?" "Naturally. Without an income, you can't survive. But all of this is coming to an end. We're still married now, so that's why we're talking." "Wait, what? I can only think about divorce now." My husband was clearly shaken by my words. "You promised to move out of that house, right, and live with me. But you've already moved. What are you saying? Of course, I won't live in a house with a husband who decides everything on his own and a bullying mother-in-law. Why are you including me? You promised to move out for Ellie. I said I've already moved, didn't I? I did as you said. Enough with the jokes. Where are you now?" My husband's tone was panicky, and he was clearly losing his cool. "Actually, I'm at my parents' house." "Why?" "I moved to my parents' rural home. I don't plan on returning to where you guys are." "You should have told me that sooner." My husband replied with a hint of relief in his voice. "If I could just give that house to Ellie, it doesn't matter where you live. It would require $3,300,000. $3,300,000. I put the house." I put the house I inherited from my father up for sale. And if you truly want to give it to Ellie, buy it for $3,300 and then hand it over. Are you joking? I'm serious. The house was still in my father's name, so I asked him to sell it. In reality, what I asked my father for was to sell the house. My father had always said, "If something happens, contact me. You can live or sell this house as you like. I'll help you." As a result of the valuation, a price of $3,300,000 was proposed, which I gladly agreed to and put the house on the market immediately. My husband probably never saw this coming. He spat out insults, consumed with anger. "Why are you doing this without asking me? This is unforgivable." "I'm not asking for, nor do I need your approval. We're getting divorced soon anyway. I don't care. Do you understand your position? You'll be the one in trouble if we divorce. Since you don't have an income, you're just a housewife. I'd rather struggle on my own than be with you forever. Listen, Ellie will be coming back soon. I told you I'm relying on Ellie's money, didn't I? So what? Like I said, if you want to let dear Ellie live in that house, just buy it for $3,300,000. That is if you can." "What? That's impossible. If Ellie has made a lot of money from her investments, I don't see why she can't afford it." "I don't know how much she made, but that's too much. She can never afford it." My husband was all excuses with no hint of an apology, maintaining his domineering attitude. I felt it was foolish to spend any more time on him and unleashed everything I wanted to say. "I'm done with you and this ridiculous mess. Did you think threatening divorce would make me give up the house? If you thought being a housewife meant I'd do whatever you say, you're so wrong. Hey, let's calm down and talk." "I am calm. Isn't it you who's panicking? I won't be controlled by you or your family anymore. Stay out of my life. Go to hell with your beloved mother, you mama's boy." I shouted loudly enough for the whole neighborhood to hear, then abruptly hung up the phone. Of course, I'd had enough of these insane calls from my husband, so I blocked his number. I immediately consulted my lawyer and decided to request a divorce. It took some time, but the divorce was finalized, recognizing my husband's fault. He and Mary still live in that apartment. As for Ellie, they couldn't provide the large house she wanted, and she was furious, claiming this wasn't the deal, and made a U-turn back overseas. My ex-husband's plan to seek financial assistance from his successful sister fell through, and now he seems to be struggling financially, having to pay me alimony and support his mother. As long as he continues to live with such a selfish mother, his life will never be prosperous. On the other hand, I've moved to the countryside and am enjoying peaceful days with my parents. I recently started a clerical job at a small company introduced by a neighbor. With that salary, I can live comfortably. I plan to live here for a while. I want to be by my parents' side as much as possible to repay the kindness they show me.